Gamerzone. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Sorry to keep you waiting. It's time for another episode of Gamerzone, everyone's favorite podcast on this channel. It's me, BGE, and welcome back. Today, we have evolved. We are growing, we are changing, we are metamorphosizing before your eyes here on Gamerzone. We have evolved the formula of the show a little bit, as opposed to how some of the old episodes went. Now we are taking one topic, and we are going to be diving into it with the guests we have here on the show today. So brace yourself. It's in the title, but we will describe it momentarily. So let me just give a quick background before I introduce our guests. So the point of this episode, if you're wondering, to cut to the chase, is that years back, about 2 years ago, I made a video called Mickle, right? Called Mickle, which was basically about some of the issues that I saw in current media development, mostly focused on video games in those examples, but kind of about the broad concept in general. And more recently, I've been continuing to think about that, and there were two pieces of criticism that people gave to me as a result of that video. One was that people had heard too much of this information in the past, that I was repeating ideas many people had said before. And the second issue was that people wanted real solutions, not just pointing out the problem. Now, I don't claim to be able to have the power to fix that. However, I have been thinking about these criticisms for a while, and in an attempt to actually address some of that and move the conversation forward a little bit, that's what the spirit of this Gamerzone is here today. And there's one other motivating factor for producing this that I want everyone to be aware of, and that is a video made by Masahiro Sakurai, the Smash guy. A video called "That Was Then, This Is Now," in which he talks about enjoying modern games and not worrying about if old games are better or worse than new games, and just enjoying new games, simple as.
だけどあくまで昔は昔、今は今です。昔は昔にしかない、戻れない。
We'll get into perhaps more of his motivations there, and the fact that I'm going to be scathingly critiquing him for a 3-minute-long video put on YouTube by a industry titan and professional. But nonetheless, this is the thesis statement right here. Old bad, new good. Is it true? Is it false? Can we analyze where the truth begins and the lies stop? Where in between are the details of that? Okay, so that's the point of the episode. We're going to be diving into the merit of old bad, new good, if there's any point to it, and continuing the discussion that Masahiro Sakurai cowardly dodged in his video. And to do so, I have brought on 3 titans of intellect, such as myself, to discuss it, and we'll mostly be talking about video games, because that's everybody's kind of wheelhouse, but this would apply to all media in general. So they have patiently waited for me to finish my long rambling introduction, and they are, welcome to the show, to Gamerzone, Mello of Running Shine. Mello, hello, buddy. How you doing?
Hey, what's up? I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Mello, as I said, runs the show at Running Shine, and it's been a while since your last video, but they're all quality, and I love them dearly.
Yeah, they take a little bit to come out, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I can relate. All right, we also have, of course, returning again, Cybershell.
Hey, what's up? That's right, I'm back. Everyone begged me not to come back, but I'm back, baby.
Yeah. Various lawsuits to make sure that you would never appear anywhere in my vicinity again. The Sonic fandom, I know, is tired of you, hobnobbing with a non-Sonic fan such as myself, but hopefully your reputation will weather the storm.
Look, it's a zone for gamers, and I'm a gamer, so what can I say?
No doubt about that. And last, a new introduction to the Gamerzone family. We have a guy I've gotten to know the work of more recently. His name is Mark, and he runs a channel called The Electric Underground. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, I'm here. I'm ready to party, and I think it's super cool to be on the channel, moving up in the world.
I'm so glad you feel that way. It's so funny. I discovered your work very recently when I saw, it was, I'll just tell people the short version. There was that sort of controversy, or just the discussion going on lately about the Resident Evil 4 remake. And that guy Crobcat made a video. Some argued it was uncharitable, but I don't know. People can decide that for themselves.
What a legend.
But the legend himself. But linked in the description of that video, because he was getting some pushback on his harsh criticism of Resident Evil 4, the remake. he was like, hey, here's a review that they don't want you to watch. And it was your video that was linked there.
Insane.
And it was pretty great, man. And I watched your video and I was like, damn, this guy's making some points. Has this man watched Mickle? Clearly, this man consulted the chart known as Mickle to make these points. And then I think it was in that video or in another one I saw when you were talking about sort of like nostalgia bait and it was like shoddy business practices, remake issues. You used clips of my old videos, like the one about Tifa's design for the FF7 remake.
Video is, yeah, if I had a Hall of Fame for YouTube videos, Tifa's Deep Valley. Or deep dive into Tifa's Valley.
Deep dive into Tifa's Valley.
Yes, that would be in the Hall of Fame YouTube videos. I'll throw that on all the time. It's an all-time classic.
Well, I'm glad you liked it, and people continue to post. It's sort of a copy pasta now, my big Tifa spiel. Like, am I still an incel despite all these, what I believe would be qualifications to not fit that category? But no, well, we all know I'm still
not
an incel,
ironically. So. I actually enjoy the video a lot because you talk about the aesthetics of character design in a realistic and cool way, and people are not talking about the aesthetics of character design, and you're making some really based points in there. So,
and dare I say, red-pilled.
Yeah, that one's an all-time classic.
Well, I'm glad you like it, and
Yes.
I went and watched a bunch of your videos and said to myself, I like the cut of this man's jib, and I think we could be best friends. And so here we are. It's official.
Best guy ever, best friend ever.
There you go. All right, so these are the guests, people, and as I said, the point of this discussion, what we will be getting into, is the thesis statement, old bad, new good. Is it true, false, or like where do the nuances lie? That I don't want to do what Sakurai did. You know, I love the man, but he was very dismissive in his video. I would recommend everybody go watch that video, because when I watched that, I mean, this is like a year back at this point, I was like, this man is doing the opposite of what I wish he was doing, or what I want people to do, and really get into sort of a nuanced discussion of, you know, maybe there are some things we can actually learn about, like, older styles of video games or the way the media landscape has changed. Not just to be needlessly critical of, like, the modern era or whatever, but, like, so that we can actually learn from that and maybe apply some of those good ideas, you know, like in a modern context, and not just, you know, throw away the question and say, just consume the slop. Don't worry about what goes into it. You know, be a consumer.
Intake the soma.
Intake the soma. And, what's the line?
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
Yeah, that's not what I'm interested in doing. And we've got the highest titans of IQ here to get into it. And so we've got a whole bunch of topics. And again, let me preface the whole discussion that's about to come. We are speaking in generalities. We're talking about an overall media landscape and trends. Of course, you will be able to bring up specific instances about how, you know, like a trend like there's more remakes than there used to be, or something like that. And they'd say, well, but not every game. Here's a new original. Yes, okay, true. And it's going to be hard to bring up, like, a documented study to say, well, let's look at the stats. Are there more remakes than they used to be, or something like that? They haven't done a peer-reviewed study on that.
We got to go to the stats.
There's going to be a lot of generalities, is what you're saying.
No doubt. Like, but, and so people can rightly make a lot of criticisms when you speak in generalities, but that doesn't make them not true. And I would request anybody, look, I'm a critical guy. I've got a critical analysis eye applied to a lot of things. I would like it if even people who maybe really do like the modern media landscape or something and have nothing bad to say about it, if you just give some of the arguments here a chance, I think you'd probably hear some wisdom in them. Because a lot of us here, you know, we've been thinking about this for a while, and we're not simply haters. We have real critiques because, I mean, again, we're going to talk mostly about video games. I don't know about them. I can't speak for them necessarily, but I love the media, the medium, and the media that exists within it, and I think it is, in fact, art. Or at least, you know, it exists, video games especially exist in the conflux between art and, consumer products. And so there's going to be an interplay between those two things. But when you notice a trend and you feel that something is changing in a negative way, it's not hateful or uncharitable to try to bring up those things with the hope that they change course or whatever. It's supposed to be a productive exercise. So I hope people view it in that way. And now I can shut up.
So you're telling me, best guy, that if something's art, it can be critiqued. Is that what you're saying here? Are you saying that we should perhaps critique art? Is that a valid thing to do?
I wonder if anyone... There probably are people that might say that you shouldn't do that. I wonder about that. Do those people exist?
There's a whole Reddit forum about that, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Would you care to summarize that point at all?
True Gaming, there's this Reddit. I went to go post a certain Resident Evil 4 remake video on there.
Right. And
it said, listen, here at True Gaming, we're true gamers, so we don't allow traditional critical reviews here, so don't even do it.
So
we just are here to talk about how great stuff is.
I was about to say that group might not exist, but there you go. And now I assume they're not a parody group. They're not a satire group.
The whole idea is that what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to post reviews that do not give critical analysis. Instead, what you're supposed to do is sort of parse through games and just talk about their individual elements. So if I did a review on True Gaming for Resident Evil 4, I'd talk about, the parry system. Look how great this parry system is, and that kind of thing. That's what they want.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up. Let me just cut to one point that I might as well start the discussion off with, which is there's going to be an overall issue here about my video I made a little while ago on the BestGuyEver channel here about thematic versus technical like aspects of stories, and how there's sort of a debate between the way the audience wants to consume a particular story or anything. Like, is it executed technically well, but the themes are really lacking, or vice versa? Some people care about some more than others, For example, like the Red Letter Media guys, they don't really buy in that much to like the thematic elements of story. Sometimes they do, but they, as like film buffs, are more interested in like the technical execution because they're adults. They don't like particularly care about the morality of friendship in the latest Marvel movie or something. They're more technically minded. Anyway, just bringing up a point. So the issue in question I wanted to mention is that not everyone wants the same thing out of video games. Case in point, the Reddit group you brought up. And what was it called again? True Gaming? True Gaming.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
they're the true gamers.
Check that out. The true gamers, fascinating. And for example, a lot of us here are more hardcore gamers, is what you might call it. And so, I mean, for me, like the pinnacle of gaming for me is beating on the hardest difficulty, like the Kingdom Hearts 2 or Kingdom Hearts 3 super bosses, and then, executing it as best you can and trying to beat your high school. Like, for me, that's like, it doesn't get better than that. And it is enhanced by, like, the music, the character design, the narrative attachment you have to this particular enemy, and, all that stuff can enhance it, but also, like, really good gameplay. There are some people who don't care about that at all. And but yeah, go on, Mello.
Well, I was just mainly going to say that I think for you, there's a really huge amount of fun and, like, there's all these systems within the game and all of these mechanics, and they all interact in a certain way. And a lot of the fun comes from kind of learning them all and really mastering them so that you can take on like the really challenging, kind of the most challenging aspects of the game, like playing it on the highest difficulty and using your knowledge to just, rip apart a super boss or something like that. And there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from playing a game that way.
I mean, I would argue, again, now this is truly subjective. Like, for me, that's like my favorite thing to do in a game. It's better than beating the final boss to complete the story. That's very rewarding as well. But it's sort of the post-game mastering the mechanics. That's like my favorite thing. But my point here is that a lot of people would never get that far. I mean, of all the people that bought, for example, Kingdom Hearts 3, a game that I have many, many negative things to say about, how many of those guys, I mean, first of all, you had to buy the DLC to get what I would consider, like, the good part of the game that comes at the end after you've beaten the whole story, which is a total clusterfuck and not good, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, how many people, I talked about this in my Mickle video, how many just want to see Donald, Goofy, and Sora hang out in Frozen with Elsa? Right. That's definitely a large demographic of the real people that bought that game, again, because it's sort of a childish medium. I'm aware of that. But just not entirely.
Oh, here is a good thing about modern gaming that we're talking about being objective and stats. One cool thing about modern gaming, it's depressingly cool, but you can actually check in the Steam achievements, okay, how many people actually beat the hardest difficulty? How many people beat that? And it's usually like 0.2% or something like that. It's crazy low. So you can actually check this objectively. Go look at the Steam achievements for the high difficulty clears and achievements, and they're usually in the 0 or 0 or 5%. They're very low.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to get into that, I mean, even the like you look at like who beat the first dungeon, who beat like the first part of the game, who bought this. It's like 10%. It's so little.
Yeah.
It's such a
It just
small
goes
amount.
to show. Maybe now is the appropriate time to bring up this phrase, because I probably will come back to it a few times. The term money laundering operation, I feel, should be part of the discussion. And I use that slightly hyperbolically, but when you're a game designer, and you, for example, again, Kingdom Hearts 3 is a good example, because it's such a clear disparity between sort of the casual players of that game and the hardcore gamers. The goals of the developer, even within the team, are probably different. Because I think Nomura's goal, for example, was primarily to finish this extremely retarded story that he'd been telling for, over a I mean, some parts of it were good. I'll die defending Kingdom Hearts 2, but Kingdom Hearts 3, no, that's not my bag. But yeah, like the combat developer or whatever, the guy who made the DLC so good, is probably very different from. I mean, I can't judge, Nomura's involvement, because he did direct Kingdom Hearts 2, the best game of all time, and so on. But what people are getting out of it is going to be all over the place, and they want to sell as many units as possible. So does that mean that the guy who wants to make the Kingdom Hearts 3 combat as good as it can possibly be to satisfy the hardcore players, that guy's desires are out of line with perhaps other developers or even just the marketing team that is also an important part of the modern, ecosystem, the economic system we're in. Those people are not the main buyers of the game. Though you cannot extract the most money from them.
Think about how hard it is to make like a super, super hard but fair, challenging like super boss that only like 0.1% of players are going to fight. And then like, when you're cramming to finish the game, obviously that kind of stuff is going to be the first to get on the cutting room floor, So there's definitely less priority for that kind of like intense systems and skills mastery versus just make a fun theme park ride that people can like, it's like almost like a movie. I mean, I'm not even talking about movie games, but just like they want to make sure everyone can beat their game for the most part. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Get as many people to be able to buy it and play it as they can. There's always that especially in the AAA space, you're wanting to capture as many people in a big a net as you can. That's always very important, especially nowadays, because there's so much money that goes into a lot of these games now.
Yeah, the industry is just getting bigger, and that's actually probably a very interesting angle. So the industry is getting bigger, but of that proportion of more people that buy video games, what percentage of that, or rather, is the ratio staying the same, increasing or decreasing of the quote unquote hardcore players versus the casual audience? I would bet that the ratio is going down massively of the hardcore audience versus the more bought a Wii U, or rather bought a Wii with Wii Sports to put into the elderly folks' home, which is fine, but.
If there's one thing I do want to ask, it's like when you say hardcore, are you thinking more like people that play kind of a lot of games that are more like they like to play games to complete them? They're not like a lot, because there's a lot of people that are like quote hardcore, right? But they play like one or two games and they go really
that's a good
intense
point.
into the depth of
Could
that,
I answer
right?
this? Because I sit and
Mark,
talk about this on my channel all the time. Yeah, so there is a difference. So I would not consider completionists, like who just for the sake of it go through and play a game, hardcore.
Oh, example, if you beat Kingdom Hearts 3 on beginner mode, I wouldn't classify you as a hardcore gamer, for example.
Similarly, there are insane hardcore gamers who literally play one game.
Mm-hmm.
One shout out to one is a young guy from Canada, Moglar, who's been playing this one of the hardest games ever made. He's been playing it for years, and he's so good at it that he's beaten Japanese super players who have literally been playing the game for decades. Now, Moglar plays probably 3 games a year, but in terms of hours he's played, it's insane. It's unimaginable how skilled this guy is. But yeah, it's not about consuming. It's about how deep into the medium and into the mechanics you go.
Right.
That would be my criteria. That makes you hardcore.
It's going to be slightly arbitrary, but there's sort of a vague cutoff there where you graduate from, I would say. It's like a pole with a lot of gray area in the middle, but you could have tendencies of one of the other. Yeah.
Here's one thing I think is a good description then, is maybe a hardcore players may be more mechanically focused compared to a casual gamers maybe more aesthetically focused. They're more focused on the story and a lot of those.
I think that's a great distinction.
Right. I mean, think about Last of Us. I mean, everybody loves that game, but you would be hard pressed to find even the staunchest defenders be like, yeah, it's the most mechanically rich and deep game ever made. It's really
What,
not.
Gunsway? You don't love Gunsway, dude?
Even though it is actually extremely impressive.
Yeah, it definitely is. The first one, especially.
I'll make my quick joke about Last of Us 2, which is in this game, which I obviously never played, but it's not for me. But in this game, that's about how bad you should and must feel about murdering your fellow man and doing all these atrocities just to get your cruel, unnecessary revenge that you eventually give up on in the end. My favorite part of that game is when you beat it, unlock New Game Plus and infinite ammo, and can kill them all without even have to worry about it. That's my favorite part of the game. I don't know about you.
It's the best part of Metal Gear Solid, when it's like you go through that whole story and then you get infinite ammo.
Well, at least that works in Metal Gear, because you don't feel bad about...
yeah, you never feel bad about anything.
I think what Best Guy Ever is pointing at is Ludo narrative dissonance.
Ludo narrative dissonance. Yes,
Ludo
that's the
narrative
word.
dissonance, the buzzword.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Let's jump in to like a specific discussion thing about, here's a thing that we're going to discuss the merits of, like, old bad, new good about, DLC/patches. The birth of sort of online play and whatnot allowed many things to happen, many changes to specifically the way games can be formed. And I'll immediately point out the good thing about it, which is that you can now release a game, and if you discover something is bad about it after it ships, you can fix that. You are not doomed, and it will not, like, financially cripple your company if it's, like, a really big problem or something. That is a good thing. But I'll immediately also note the bad side of that exact same phenomenon, which is now, as I'm sure probably everybody listening to this has noticed, now day one patches and whatnot have become almost 100% ubiquitous for every game made. Meaning, if you don't have a internet connection, say your internet went down, or just you've got a bad signal or anything like that, for whatever reason, you just want to pop in a disc and play, it has encouraged devs, or rather, it's put an incentive in place. It is enabled. Enabled is the right word, yes. It has enabled developers to not have to worry about getting everything perfect. Thus, it enables more lazy development of their games. And this is many, different avenues of problem that births out of it. So there's more.
It's also made game critique hell on earth, because there's been games I reviewed and then, then they patch the stuff that I critique in my review, and you get 1,000 messages, bro, what are you even talking about? I'm like, well,
right.
They should put a letter out there that they patched it or something so people realize I'm not insane.
I'll bring up my favorite example of this, because I was there midnight release, day one that this was an issue, playing Bloodborne. The day it was released, it had, one, the loading times were insanely long, took so long, and two, the loading screens that you're looking at for an insanely long period of time had, like, just a blank, it had, like, a symbol on it. There was not the thing that exists if you play Bloodborne now, of it shows, like, item descriptions, which at least gives you something to read while you're waiting for it to load. Both of those things have now been fixed, but that was not how it was when I first played.
I remember those load times.
Go back and listen to any review of
times.
the Bloodborne the day it came out, and they're all going to be talking about those fucking loading times or whatever. I mean, it's little things like loading times, or even major content patches. Like Yeek apparently is getting some 1.5 update. It's just going to be completely different type of game. For
truly a postmodern RPG, no doubt.
Right, it's never done being developed.
Exactly.
One thing I want to say is that it's definitely very nice the way that DLC is, because you remember, especially during the days of cartridges, you would spend all this money producing all these cartridges, and you'd ship them out, and there'd be some terrible game-breaking, just some terrible bug in there, right?
Yeah.
So you have to pull them all back in, and that costs you millions of dollars and all of these things, and just what a mess, So the big thing about that is that, like, developers did spend a lot more time, I think, really fixating on, like, making sure that there weren't, like, bad memory leaks, and there weren't terrible bugs, and a lot of these kind of things. And in a way, it is very nice that nowadays you can patch things with DLC, because it means development time doesn't need to, and a lot of expenses doesn't need to go to that testing right away. But it does cause that issue of, like, yeah, now it's a lot of people are doing what the software industry does, which is release something, it doesn't really work. You essentially are buying a beta, and you have to wait for them to fix it, or even worse, in the future you might have to pay money for them to fix. I mean, you were talking about Kingdom Hearts 3. I imagine that ideally they probably wanted that content in there from the start. They probably wanted those data org fights in there from the start. but just ran out of time. Someone hold our hand. Now you have to pay $30 more.
That's true, but let me point out one thing. So you don't have to buy the DLC for Kingdom Hearts 3 for something that was there was an update that was a patch released at the same time the DLC came out. And what did that patch contain? It contained probably designed for the super bosses, for the DLC that was coming out, but just there are 6 new abilities that fundamentally change the way the combat flow works and feels in the game. And you have to beat the game once to unlock those abilities, so it's not going to be there for your initial playthrough of the game in any case. But it is so much better. They vastly improved the feel of combat, which is your main Keyblade combo that you're going to be doing the entire game, the whole time. It feels
now
so
you feel
much
like an
better
asshole
with that.
for buying the game and playing it on launch when you should have waited for them to make
That's
the
right.
game good.
And that's one of the issues that we're dealing with today. No doubt about it.
Buying a game on release now is the equivalent of being the early adopter of software. You're not like, you're now the guy that has to basically beta test. Everyone always jokes, it's like, this game is released on console and then it gets released on PC. Yeah, thanks for beta test. I always love that. It cracks me up. It's so true, I think, can I bring one thing up also? That one of the, we're talking a lot about how you have to download the DLC, right? Like, how do you download it? You have to get it from the internet. You remember when Xbox One was first getting released and everyone was all up in arms? Oh, this thing always needs to be connected to the internet. That's so stupid. Why do we need to do that? Like, it's now, everyone just accepts nowadays that you need the internet if you want to update your game. You need the, it's not like they put here's 1.3, download it from the website and you can upload it offline. There's like really no options for that. You have to make sure that whatever console you're using is connected to the internet. And even on PC nowadays, you often need to make sure that you're logged in on Steam. It needs to go through the whole DRM process. It needs to do all this stuff.
Let me just play the devil's advocate, because I went through that. I grew up with that, so I also have a certain resistance and don't like the direction we're going. But let me play the devil's advocate and say, I mean, in one sense, that's just the way the world is moving, and so maybe it's not something we should, I don't know, like, be mad about or anything, but it's just that's just the industry is adapting to the changing world around them, and it's not something to complain about. I don't know.
I totally get that, and you're right.
Advocate.
This is a worldwide thing, and sometimes like when it's very easy, especially if you're like a very kind of focused. You're always focused on your industry. You're always thinking about, video games, right? It's like, well, there's a whole world, and a lot of them are doing this stuff. I mean, in software, you're getting that stuff offline is becoming more and more rare. I mean, hell, nowadays, a lot of software is on servers itself. You don't even get your own local copy. You have to go to a website and be connected to use Google Documents or use a lot of these
That's
things
a good point.
nowadays. So it's not necessarily that games, I don't really fault them for doing a lot of this stuff, but it's interesting how a lot of that initial outrage kind of, as they kind of boiled the frog, I guess, with this stuff,
it goes away over time. Yeah,
people kind of immediately started to accept it as after like 2 years of them slowly moving towards this model of it always needs to be online.
And so that's why a podcast like this, for example, that sort of that is intended to bring up critique, is a good, like, putting a post in the stand to just measure, okay, how have things changed since a measurable time in the past? Is this a good change? And what have been, like, the consequences of these new phenomena that now exist? So, make your own conclusions for yourself, people. But Mark, you were being the devil's advocate.
Yes.
What were you saying?
Yeah, so talking about, like, this is the way the world's going. Everything's becoming more online, which is absolutely true. But if we're going to consider games an artistic medium, which I do, don't you think it's a little bit concerning that how short-sighted it is that we're going to tie the entire medium to the technical, server performance, and how many games have we lost when servers go down or when servers get closed? And, will that continue into the future? Or is this sort of like, well, it'll be around in our lifetime and that's good enough. But how many generations from now do you think these servers are going to be able to support or give these experiences to players in the future? If you look at the
roll
games,
their eyes at that, like, they're going to shut the servers down. Come on, but like, it's generations is like a very optimistic. Like, these companies want to shut down their, like, old servers and game servers as soon as they can get away with it. Period.
Yes.
They're not even thinking about 5 years in the future. I mean, I remember at one point I thought this thing of like, why don't companies keep their source code around? I was like very ignorant. I didn't understand that companies destroy their own source code because the idea of that leaking out and then like somebody will take the code and go to a competing company and show it to them. Hey, here's all this stuff. That's something, especially within Japanese developers, that freaks them out a lot. They're very protective of their engineering work and all of that, and they don't want other people to be able to see it. So yeah, just get rid of it.
I believe that's the justification for things like how Final Fantasy IX and I think the others too. It's like original content was lost. Like why the PC remaster of FF9 has like the really shitty background elements because they didn't have the source content to make like high resolution, updates of that. I could be wrong about that. That was the story that I heard recently.
I think you're right, and I think Kingdom Hearts
is a very
1's the
nice
same thing.
euphemism. I think more like destroyed.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure that someone at the company said, "Get rid of it."
And
get rid of it. It's taking up space and it's a liability. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, so true. Oh, you know what? Let me make a broad point here, which is because I think this is a understandable critique, and you kind of already pushed back at it. But I will say, this is just video games. Who cares? What do you say to that, Mark? Maybe you can speak to that.
Yes, I talk about this all the time. So this is a nice option select that people have, where the gaming industry says games are a serious medium. People need to take it seriously. We should be taken seriously, like film, art, music, literature. We should be taken completely seriously. This is a thriving industry. This is the medium. And then as soon as some really shady stuff starts going on and they start doing really short-sighted business practices or things that degrade the medium artistically, then they flip-flop to the other argument, which, whoa, bro, it's just games. Chill out. What's the problem? What's all the fuss? We're just playing these games for kids. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it.
I'll get a teeny bit conspiratorial here because I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go on. But and you might ask, why would they do that? And I would say they may have a cynical motivation of the profit motive, be hyped, be involved in the hype cycle, good thing, new thing, good, just consume. And I'm not saying everybody, thinks that way deliberately, but those forces exist that make people just want to be charitable to the new thing because it's good for everybody's bottom line if it sells good. And,
what's a hilarious example of this is, okay, so when Breath of the Wild came out, if you said anything critical of Breath of the Wild, you will get the Nintendo hit squad coming after you. I mean, look at all the reviewers who said this was funny. Super Bunny Hop said this on Twitter the other day. He's like, because now that the new game's out, Tears of the Kingdom, now you can critique. Now people are saying, well, they improved this over Breath of the Wild. They've improved that over Breath of the Wild. This was a problem in Breath of the Wild, but now that it's fixed in Tears of the Kingdom. But Super Bunny Hop was like, okay, but what about when Breath of the Wild came out and we made these critiques and everyone freaked out,
Well,
so
it wasn't a problem then because I was getting paid to say it was good, so it wasn't an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm being paid to say that Tears of the Kingdom is good, so forget Breath of the Wild. That's old. Now it's about Tears of the Kingdom. So that's a funny example of this.
I am going to say that Zelda fans have a very big problem where a game comes out and they really, really love it, right? And they're like, this is such a great thing. It's a real masterpiece. And then after 5 years, they hate it and they want nothing to do with it. And then after 10 years, it rolls back around. Oh, it's such a great game. I love it. Like they do this with every entry.
Are you saying it doesn't live up to the hype? Is that what you're getting at here?
I think people get real excited and they get caught up in their emotions, I think. And then it's like, not that I'm not even really giving anyone a hard time for that. But that's it. I notice this happens every single time with every new release. They're always like, they love it for a bit, and then they need to, and then after a while, they're able to be more critical of it, and then I think the nostalgia hits them again, and they go, oh, you know what, this actually was very meaningful.
Gaming fosters some of the most intensely defensive fan bases I've ever seen in the entire internet. Like, the only thing I even think that's remotely, like, comparable is, like, Marvel movies. People will, like, be, like, defending those and with their life before they're even out, you know what I mean? Like, did people in the 1980s, like, go apeshit defending movies before they even came out? Is that, like a new phenomenon?
That's an excellent question, and I think the answer is no, because the media landscape has changed, and it's become so much more involved in our personal lives, and people have attached
people tie their identity up to this shit now.
And don't you think it's interesting that both Marvel and Nintendo are properties that targeted children, and that a lot of people who are so defensive of Zelda and so defensive of Marvel played and read these comics and played the games when they were children? Isn't that kind of an
And,
interesting coincidence?
I see what you're getting at there. I don't even hold that against them, nor do I hold it against Nintendo like they're deliberately trying to like foster cultists to defend themselves. It's just, it does make sense if you get attached to something with it when you're a child, you will be very defensive of it.
Yeah,
and,
people are very, very emotionally attached to the things that they experience as kids. I'm not going to give necessarily someone a hard time just because of that. But yeah, you are right though. Yeah, sometimes, especially now as people get older, they do hold on to that and they will get defensive or even feel hurt, if somebody is critical of those things that they hold very dear to them.
Yeah, the interesting thing though is that like there's children's literature and children's media, and that as you get older, you look back on it fondly, but you understand, oh, this is a game for a child or a movie or book or thing. This is for children. But what Nintendo does, it has this nice little kind of all-around thing. So it's for children, but it's not only for children, so that you are plugged into Nintendo your entire life. Unlike the Bernstein Bears, you don't stop playing Nintendo. You keep going your entire life. So you get attached to it literally your whole life.
Well, until the gritty Netflix remake of Bernstein Bears is going to have sex, drugs, and rock and roll as God intended. And it'll be great. Then I can, I can justify my attachment, my pathological attachment to that. You know what? To go back real quick to the whole, like I said, like it's just video games, who cares? But you said that people, can switch between different arguments here. But as long as an individual is consistent, for example, Mark is crystal clear. He views, I'm sure not every video game, every like shitty gotcha designed to milk money out of you, that might not overall be designed to be artistic, even though there can be good art within it.
Yeah,
like
that's
someone
porn.
drew a really nice picture. Right.
So like
But
mobile
some art
games and
exists.
stuff like that are the equivalent of video game porn. That's what they're made for. They're made to titillate your senses and to engage those factors, and they shamelessly do that. And in some ways, I almost respect that more than what a lot of AAA games do, where they're trying to act like they're legit games, but they're adding in all these pornographic. When I say pornographic, I mean game mechanic.
You can also view it like junk food, like it's just
Junk food, yeah.
dopamine.
I mean, there's like
distribution
exploitation
system.
films which are designed just to be as appealing and to a
Right.
certain demographic or whatever. I mean, so it's like it's like a combination of wanting to make money and wanting to make an artistic product. Sometimes it makes something that's kind of hard to classify.
Really irritates me when they're mixed together. Like if you look at sometimes see sprites that are so beautiful, and I'll go, "Oh man, what game was this in?" And it's in some stupid pachinko game from on the Super Nintendo. It's like they got some beautiful artists to do this great thing, and it's on this trash. It's on this garbage.
You know what I learned that's fascinating about that is one reason why is they actually pay better. Like if you're a video game artist, you will get paid better working on like mobile games and stuff because they make money versus making a passion project where they make $2. So
That is an
it
important
sucks,
incentive to
but
keep in mind.
That's why that happens.
Yeah, and we can talk more about maybe how the industry has moved. Let me make one sort of overall point again about this, which is there's going to be a lot of pushback perhaps on some of the criticisms like that, it's just video games, who cares? And you might legitimately, maybe you're like a 45-year-old trucker and you've got a family to take care of and you really think it's just video games, who cares? That's fine. You can be consistent with that argument. But like to that argument and lots of other ones, I would say there's an overall principle to keep in mind, which is that even though reality can fall short, and let's say 99.999% of all video games ever made are not art and are just like shitty consumer products, theoretically that could be the case. It's still good to keep in mind that hope springs eternal. There are definitely video games that I would qualify as art. I think Final Fantasy VII is one of them, even though a lot of it is designed to just be fun filler. I find the story compelling. I find the characters impressive. I find it very well written. It's stimulating. Knowing the backstory of it as I do, there's important insights into man's relationship with death and like the afterlife and whatnot that can be drawn from that. At the very least, you could call it like a well-written like young adult fiction story. But I'm getting off track. My point of all this is to say, to that guy who has a lot of criticisms or whatever, it's that it is good to aim for the ideal, even if we live in a world where there's problems and mistakes and many games are made with money in mind, that like you shouldn't just forget that some people out there would like, for example, a well-crafted piece of art. And so don't just dismiss all those concerns because we live in reality. They gotta make money. It is what it is. Just get over it. It is still a good thing to aim for the ideal and keep in mind that good things can be made. So it's worth caring about. Because some people say just don't worry about it. That'd be my response to them. So you probably have spoken to that as well, Mark. I might have lifted this from one of your videos actually as I was preparing for this.
I've inceptioned you. It's in your brain now. You don't know where it came from.
There's definitely some of that
Yeah,
going on.
no, I think that's fantastic because if you aim at just engaging the most basic feedback, and that's what a lot of game design now is like, okay, loot boxes and stuff like that. How do we engage just the most immediate basic feedback? Great art doesn't necessarily do that, because if you do that, like I said, you end up with pornography in the end. Like, pornography is way better at that than great art.
Yeah.
Great art is about sending a message, sending an idea, changing the way people maybe view the world and view things, view their own life. Like, it's giving you something more outside of just pressing buttons and wiggling analog sticks.
Now's a good time to insert my thought about the soul versus soulless debate, which I'll just ram in here real quick because it does relate to, I think, this distinction between like art and a product, which is here's my definition that I talked about in like a podcast a little while ago or something. My definition of soul versus soulless is something that has soul would be something that basically you can feel the hand of a craftsman behind it that is attempting to convey something of meaning, probably about like the human experience. And whatever, there are many examples you could bring up about that. Just to make a gamey one, I talked about this again in a podcast I did, my patron podcast. But there's a moment in Wild Arms 1 where I massively detected lethal amounts of soul emanating from the game, which is where you go into a town, and the town has all these treasure chests that are blocked off, and you can't reach any of them because there are NPCs in the way, and you hate them. And in particular, there's a dog blocking one treasure chest that physically bounces you away when you try to get too close to it. You leave the town and come back, and when you return, demons have killed everyone in the town. And all of a sudden, you can now reach all those treasure chests that you were dreaming about. Oh, that high potion that's in there. I want it so bad. Yeah, but the best moment is when, sorry to spoil Wild Arms 1 from like 1995, 1997, whatever. And the dog was defending his treasure chest too, and you open up the treasure chest and you're like, finally, I'm going to get like the best item in the game. And what is inside the dog's treasure chest is just a bone. A single bone that has almost no gameplay function in the game. It was just his thing that he cared about and was protecting. And you could totally ignore this. You don't have to think about this at all. I'm sure many players wouldn't experience this. And all of a sudden, your anger that's recontextualized about wanting this dog to be murdered because he's blocking you from, plus 50 HP during combat potentially one time. Now you're like, oh, he's like a real thing that has actual priorities of his own. He feels suddenly like a well-developed character, relatively speaking, for this small interaction. I feel the touch of humanity in the design of this video game, and that's cool. Meanwhile,
not just that, but it made you.
Oh, well, yeah. Meanwhile, I'm going to go play my gacha and just, pay $50 to get another 50 crystals so I can, reroll to get my latest anime waifu in the new swimsuit edition. Equal forms of art, I think. Absolutely equal. There is no distinction to be made here. There's the distinction.
The big thing I just wanted to say is that through doing that, he was able to get you to feel the developers behind this game were able to get you to feel something about yourself. And
I felt guilt. I felt like, oh, I'm disconnecting from like my fellow living things. Now I care about this dog. They took me on a wild ride, and it was impressive. It was impressive.
I completely agree with the what really makes it art is that there's some kind of message, there's some kind of intentionality behind it beyond I just want to make money. And the way it's hard to point out like specific things which are like, oh, this is proof of that. But like you said, this is the thing always people talk about when they're talking about soul. It always comes down to these like little details that like maybe 99% of people wouldn't even notice, but if you do, it feels like it was just for you. I think that's one of the reasons people went so apeshit for Undertale, because that game is just jam-packed with little details like that.
Yeah, I think a large part of it that this is one of the issues, maybe this is appropriate to bring up, one of the issues I have with modern games, and I think I really first noticed it in Final Fantasy 13. It still had some of this, but it felt very distinct from the other Final Fantasies before it, as a big fan. What makes a game fun a lot of the time, or you feel like you have a real connection with it, is when you're not just following the path that they have laid out for you. You feel like you have agency in the world, and you are like, for example, going off the beaten path to discover like a side quest that you choose to follow and you choose to get immersed in. I mean, it's very clear once you're feeling the agency in a story. You're like, oh, I'm invested in this. I'm making a conscious choice to go, make this request that this, whatever, like bounty hunter asked me to go slay this monster because it like murdered his daughter and he wants the doll back, or some like Bloodborne lore type stuff. You do similar things in all kinds of games, and when you feel like it's your choice as a player, you're not just following the path basically forced upon you by the developer. I just think that allows you to connect on a much deeper level with the game, or at least maybe it's not that it allows you. I've noticed a distinct correlation of when I feel agency, I connect more with the game. And so I suspect there's a psychological principle at play here that could be applied generally.
One thing I do want to insert into this conversation that I think like never comes up in these types of conversations is, in my view, game mechanics are also very important to the artistic expression of a game. Not just its story, not just its lore, but the actual way the levels and mechanics are designed, I think, are a part of artistic expression. And the example that I brought up in Resident Evil 4 Remake is, of course, the camera system being locked to your back, where part of that game's artistic expression is letting you know you are never safe. There might be something behind you all the time, and you can't ever be certain that something is not right behind you. And I think what happens is the conversation around games and video games, so often we forget that the actual composition of the game itself can be very artistic and can actually send a lot of really important messages that may not be as easy to quite articulate as something like, a story or things like that. But a lot of the way games do their level design, do their mechanics, do their life systems and all that can be an artistic expression. I think a famous example of this is like checkpoints, where in the 2000s-ish, 2010s-ish, it was decided checkpoints aren't cool anymore. We're going to do constant forward progression. But in my mind, a checkpoint is an artistic expression. Like the developer is saying, okay, this is a consequence. This is a journey. And if you make it through this checkpoint and then clear the boss, this is an artistic statement rather than just having checkpoints every 3 seconds so that you can just forward progress through the game all the time. So because that makes nothing has impact anymore. Whereas with the checkpoint system, killing a boss, that is a moment you're popping off. You're like, yeah.
I've got a perfect example for this. When I first played Silent Hill 2, I played it on PC, and I believe it had save states. And because you have save states in the game, it utterly undid, because originally Silent Hill 2 has save points, and so those are the designated checkpoints in the game as it was originally designed. Introducing save states totally undoes the consequence of something bad happening to you, absolutely cutting through the tension and fear of something bad happening to James.
Right.
So it's
crazy
utterly
too.
Destroys it. Yeah.
Just because people, like, just to tie back into the Resident Evil 4 remake real quick, people would be like, oh, you can't move and aim in the original. Like, that's, objectively bad. There's people who really think that's, like, objectively bad, and the remake's better because you can move and shoot. They just have zero interest in trying to, like, understand the intentionality behind why they made it that way in the first game, and, they're like, oh, it must have just been a limitation, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Let me just speak to that, and I'm sure you guys would probably all agree on this. But so on this point of something being objectively better or worse, due to perhaps like technical evolution along the path, it is such a false narrative that just a game system having more complexity added to it. This is kind of what Mikkel was about. Just because more complexity, more options are enabled, in no way does that speak to the artistry of the game. I'll always quote my favorite line on this from Twin Perfect, from their, whatever it was, like I think it was Silent Hill Downpour video, where they were like, look at the poly count, and they said, what about the artistry count? Can we get an artistry count on screen right now, please? Yeah, I mean, you really should look at it that way. You shouldn't just it. If you're engaging with a game and you claim it to be artistic in some way, then you should, in fact, think of it in that way and not just, talk. If you're going to just talk about the polys, there's more polys and that's good. That's fine from a technical level. But if you're trying, I think a lot of people, to be intellectually honest, you got to think about.
It's a hilariously obvious example of this that everyone.
Yeah, what's that?
It's so obvious that people don't even think about it. It's pixel art. Pixel art has no reason to exist. It has no reason to continue forward because it does not. We do not have those technical limitations anymore, and yet pixel art is still incredibly popular, maybe even increasingly popular. It's a thriving style.
I put that exact thing into my Mickle video because pixel art is an independent art style that has its own strengths and weaknesses. A lot of people really like and can be used. What was that? Blasphemous came out not too long ago. Wasn't pixel art?
So many games still come out with pixel art.
Yeah, it's obviously it's super common and you see it all over the place. And why did, for example, Final Fantasy or any modern game series, why did they stop using pixel art? Well, for a number of reasons. 3D artwork is pretty easy to develop. The larger point here is that times have changed, technology has shifted. There are a lot of technical benefits to be derived from doing 3D modeling and stuff because you can rotate them. You don't have to make a pixel for every angle on them, all that good stuff.
Less expensive.
Less expensive, yep. So there's a lot of good reasons for it, but you could absolutely just be a guy who really, really likes pixel art. I happen to really like pixel art a lot when it's well done. Metal Slug is a beautiful looking game.
Oh my gosh, Metal Slug.
Don't bring up
insane.
SNK, dude. I mean, one of the big things about
bring up
SNK is that King of Fighters 13 basically bankrupted that company because they
I was
went
going to
so
say
hard
King
on
of Fighters.
pixel
Yeah,
art.
is that
But
the
it
most
looks
detailed
so
pixel art
good.
ever? It's
It's
unbelievably
beautiful,
fluid.
yeah. But there is, if you want the answer, why don't big companies do that? That King of Fighters 13 is your answer. It bankrupts the company. It's so expensive, so difficult.
To play devil's advocate a little bit, SNK's overall business strategy has never been super good, So I feel like maybe that pixel art takes a little bit too much blame for SNK exploding because the company was not doing great.
No, they were already
to that
running
point.
into problems.
But
there
there's
is
no doubt
it's
that was
it's
a
much
factor.
easier to do what they're doing now with 15, even when 14 going into 3D models. It's so much more cost effective, and you don't need quite as many artists or time or all of those things to draw out all the individual things.
It's just interesting to me how it's like, back in the Super Nintendo days, all the best art, Metal Slug, it's like this amazing, beautiful pixel art. There wasn't like they sat down and be like, should we do pixel art for this game? It was just like, no, of course, that was just what games
was the
were
medium.
like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't even like a choice. It wasn't even really a choice. But then all of a sudden, all the highest, one of the best looking games in the industry now, you got to find some hyper realistic 3D stuff. So the only people still really doing pixel art, people who are deliberately seeking out and choosing that. It's not like a dying or dead art form in the same way making statues isn't like a dead art form, but that used to just be one of the default modes of expression, and it's sort of not entirely lost art form, like I said, but it's just the context in which they're created is so different now. It makes you appreciate them even more.
Let's talk about that aspect because we're getting into it now. About I always bring up how Square Enix is a technology arms race, a graphics arms race. They admitted the Final Fantasy 13 director admitted they were obsessed. It wasn't actually the most important thing. But on the point of technology, it feels like there's because we live in a time where technology is accelerating so fast. We have all lived through the period where 3D art, 3D video games, did not exist, and now they do. That's
the
amazing.
Generation.
And you look at, just look at a game like Last of Us 2. It looks amazing. It's amazing they can make something that looks that, basically real. It's a little still fake looking, but whatever. It looks really good.
Compared to Pong, it looks pretty real. There's people who are 50 who got to experience Pac-Man and being like, "Whoa, look at the graphics."
My parents remember when Pong showed up on the scene. Yep, and they've told me
same
about
for
it.
mine.
And so the point of pixel art is a perfect example of this, but just on the larger concept there is this appearance and sort of assignment to the Ashbin of history of all kinds of tech. And in game design, it's of game design philosophies or styles or particular ideas. And this is the aspect that I feel that Masahiro Sakurai, love him as much as I do, this is the most important thing that I think I would want to talk to him about. It's not that games are just getting better, number go up, games better. And I'm sure he
would like
that.
to think that, wouldn't he?
He himself said that there are things that are good about old games too. So I'm not trying to clown on the guy too bad. But the specific issue I see is how new things appear, and rather than be judged good or bad and sort of continue to be iterated on and developed for their own artistic merit. They just get tossed and moved on because there's a shiny new thing that we now want to move on to. And again, pixel art's a good one. There's all kinds of like game styles. I mean, I am a huge fan of Metroidvanias. And so I love games like Hollow Knight. Seeing Metroid Dread appear was great. But you notice, compared to the past, that style of 2D platformer is a little bit less ubiquitous than it once was, because there are other styles of games that are more marketable, are more flashy, and this gets into like what I find to be games are made like for the trailer to appeal to the most broad demographic, to just they have to communicate that you should buy this game. By what metric can they do that? Looking good is the only metric they have to attach to grab the attention of the viewer, so they have to lean into that. But yeah, there's a lot of things. Mark, maybe you love shmups, right?
Absolutely.
You're a big shmup guy.
Hell yeah.
And shmups never dominated like the whole world, but in the 80s,
They did
for
at
example,
one point, long ago.
yeah, a
They
long
did at
time
one
ago.
point, yes.
But as you can see, they're no longer like the top of the industry. And so you want to speak to that at all?
Arcade games in general. It would be nice if it was just shmups. I mean, I love shmups, but I think shmups were kind of the canary in the coal mine for their fellow genres. I think there's a ton of genres that have died that people don't even remember because they never really had the chance to shine so much. Like, you remember rail shooters? What's a rail shooter, right? That genre is pretty much dead.
The JRPG is still hanging around, but it's been taking a pounding lately. And
Yes.
Can I talk about that? I was sick a couple of weeks ago, and I really just wanted a very nice, comfy JRPG to play in my bed, and I'm looking through a bunch of stores, and it's like almost everything is real-time combat now. I don't understand this weird idea that real-time combat is somehow just on its own superior to turn-based combat.
Such a good point.
In like Japanese games now, it's always got to be like real-time. Like, I like some of those real-time. I like the Tales series decently enough, but why does every game need to be a Secret of Mana or a Tales, things like that? I mean, it's not neat. It's like there's room for a good traditional turn-based
Shout out to Bravely Default, one of my favorite new JRPG styles that came out relatively recently. I only
love
played
Bravely
the first
Default
one.
so much. Yeah, I mean that's a huge thing. I wish there was more little things like that. I don't think that needs to be made just as a throwback. I think there is real demand for those kinds of games, even some of the bad ones. I know there's a lot of Japanese players that really love just playing like old crappy NES RPGs that were made by like very small teams and they barely work. It's like, it's great. It's Kusoge, it's Kino, you know. I love it. Well, I mean,
wait,
you were also
Kusoge means shit. That's not right.
Yeah.
Well,
they're like,
Kusoge
but
is one of those things
sometimes
where
it gets
can
used
mean
ironically.
shit, but it can also
okay,
mean
okay.
awesome shit.
It's awesome
Like,
shit.
it's
It's
awesome
just
shit.
Japan expert checking in here. That's not the technically correct word.
my superior Japanese culture.
I only know that because shmups are full of Kusoge. Like, Kusoge is like a genre of shmup, basically.
But I will
doubt.
say,
There's some hilarious.
you're bringing up a lot of
ones.
old genres, but even some of the newer genres. Like I played a lot of those like extreme sports kind of games, like the EA Big Sports and all those Tony Hawk games, and I really love all of those.
Yeah.
And those don't really exist anymore. There's a lot of genres, especially the ones that did focus more on mechanics and
RTS
a lot of fun.
games are
and,
kind of out of vogue now.
That's true.
yeah, very out of
I have
vogue.
a question
just
for
because,
the panel,
yeah.
for the whole panel, because you guys are much more RPG guys than myself. I'm a shmup guy, so the fate of shmups is sealed. It is not a commercially viable genre anymore. Shmups are made now by pure, hardcore, passionate mother effers. Like, that is who make shmups. Even the bigger shmups are made by people where it makes no sense for them to make it. They're doing it purely out of passion. That is the fate of the genre. My question is, what do you guys do if that is legitimately the fate of JRPG, where the fate of this genre is it will not continue commercially?
Oh.
I mean,
Just
we
gotta
see
make
them
my own.
cope. we simply see them cope. What more can a man do under such circumstances? You just the thing about JRPGs in particular is that they are by design originally, they are very well, okay, not every single one, but like they're typically large scripts, large games with a lot of content that goes into them. So like it was hard for them to get made typically speaking, and why like bigger companies like Square Enix, or Square at the time, when they were still small, why those were the guys making them, and like I forget who made the Tales games, Bando Namco or whatever.
That was yeah.
Namco Bandai.
Namco,
right.
basically, yeah.
Like you kind of need a lot of people, or like if you're gonna make a fan project, JRPG, as I'm sure many of us have downloaded RPG Maker and tried to make like one thing, and you're like, this is too much work. I'm not doing this. Sure, some people are going to make, but compared to a shmup, which, I mean, for example, Zune, the Toho guy, since day one, he's been making them himself and doing basically everything on his own. That's a medium that can sort of exist among fans. I'm just saying, JRPGs, I think we're absolutely, it's so unbelievably, completely, totally over, bros, and we are not coming back.
It would have to
that's
be,
what I think.
People would have to make smaller scale games, I know, like there was a JRPG.
But how am I going to defeat God in a small scale JRPG, which I must do, or it won't be?
What was it? Was it Omori or one of that game that came out that was a JRPG made by just a couple of people? There's a couple people can make them, but they can't be Final Fantasy.
Right,
they can't have a billion jobs and all of this stuff. You have to make it economic when you're just making it with one or two people. It has to be more small scale.
I'd say a decade, but like that's what like a AAA game takes to make these days. Final Fantasies now take 7 years in between releases.
They take forever.
And I will say, as someone who, I do some Game Maker stuff, and I've been working on a shmup and stuff. For my shmup, I put in the alpha version of it. I put in menus and stats and that kind of thing, not to get to play, but like just to make the game run, like leaderboards and stuff like that. And I remember coding that and thinking, imagine doing this, but for an RPG. That does not sound fun. Like I suspect the actual process of making an RPG is like doing
it's absurd.
Homework times 10,000. I mean, it's not as fun.
I think the hardest part about making go on, Mel.
There's a meme, especially with a lot of like people that are into making their own games and hobbyists and all that, of like, I'm gonna make my perfect big giant RPG game, and then they give up after a week because you realize like every single little thing is hard to make. Not even like
and
just
monotonous.
A couple of things here and there, and we can automate most stuff. It's like, no, everything needs intentional design. Every town needs to be specifically made.
Like
every
that
character
dog
needs
incident
dialogue.
in Wild Arms 1. That takes soul and effort. And the nature of a JRPG is that sort of like a visual novel. There's a lot of text. You need a lot of planning for the story, and I think that
menus
makes it even more of a pain to translate.
Menus suck too.
Lots of people don't think about menus or even dialogue systems. I've had to make my own menus and dialogue systems for my project, and it's not it's not something you do right overnight. You have to really think about it. You have to plan it. You have to have a lot of things in mind. Like being able to make a big RPG requires like thinking very big scale. You have to have a huge plan. You have to like have it all mapped out.
I feel like hobbyists making a shmup, for example, are going to be mostly familiar with like how to design a shmup.
You would think.
My phone.
Well, don't get me wrong. I'm sure it's hard. I'm just saying, I don't think your typical JRPG consumer is necessarily going to be, because I do think it's a writing-intensive process. You have to be scripting and forming the characters and designing the worlds and stuff. And I'm not sure that's... I'm not trying to say it's easier to make a shmup or anything. I'm just saying that the skill set of a JRPG doesn't lend itself as well to a hobbyist's design, is what I'm trying to say.
I don't trust a hobbyist to make a good like level curve and fun JRPG, you know what I mean? Let alone writing all the dialogue necessary.
No, it's going to be... It's going to be, or it's got to be something. Yeah, it's going to have like some gimmicks.
They're less monotonous to make. That
exactly.
would be my difference.
That's a good point.
It's like making a good shmup is like
testing a new bullet pattern has got to be easier than testing a JRPG level system.
Exactly. Yeah, making a good shmup is actually a hell of a process, but it's a lot more fun than coding menu after menu after menu, stat after stat after stat, and all that. That sounds like madness.
On the subject of JRPGs, I must shout out whenever like modern JRPGs come up, I must bring in how Neo Twoey or Twoey 2 was the unexpected JRPG that I had been asking for 4 years. They actually made it at Square Enix as like an afterthought project. They just forgot to market it. They made a mistake. They forgot that they actually could make good games still. And so if you're looking for like a great JRPG, I would say that TWEWY 2 basically is it. It's not like perfect, whatever. There's like a couple little things that I'd change about it. It is actually the JRPG that I've been waiting for.
Yeah.
And
Neo
it's
TWEWY
great.
is a total. I mean, you say, I think kind of jokingly, they forgot to market it. I think they legitimately, that game
It might
was
have been
probably
actually
a passion
vindictive,
project
I
from
think.
inside.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there was any
was about to
intention
say that,
within
Nate.
the people that were higher up within Square Enix to give any money towards marketing that
Which
thing.
is
It's like,
bizarre
you
because
guys
Nomura
can do
was
this for
involved.
fun in your own time. We don't care. We're
Yeah,
not gonna
that's
do
what I
much
think it
with
is.
this.
So that actually
Yes.
kind of comes across. Sure, they were employees, but like that's sort of a hobbyist thing. Like within the larger juggernaut that is Square Enix, some good artists were allowed to make a good thing, but it wasn't like the primary focus. Because I mean, look at you look at the game. You know, I hate to say it. You look at the game and you're like, this is not AAA.
Right.
This is not
Yeah.
going to bring the boys to the yard and push
But I
lots
mean,
of
oh,
units.
there used
you
to be
know?
a space for AA games, but like ever since like the handheld mobile or the handheld market really went away, like it's like what do we have now? We've got mobile phones
It's
and the
over,
Switch.
baby.
Like that's the closest thing we have.
Yeah, that's true.
People forget companies like Insomniac used to be like 30 employees. You know, like you finish Ratchet and Clank and there'd be like 30 guys show up on screen and that's the credits. You know, like it's that was the ideal, I think, time with it, because there's this whole thing of like Pareto principle. Within enough time, you're just going to have one person, like two companies will have everything, and then everyone else is making their small indie games. But there was that little period of time when it's like you can make a company with 10 to 30 people, and you had enough financial freedom. You had a publisher that gave you like $1 million, and this was like enough money that you could flex, and all your artists could get a lot done, and you could make something really good. But it also wasn't so much money that you were constrained to need to make sure like you played everything very safe so that you could make a return on investment, which is the issue we have now. Everything needs to be safe now, because if these things have $100 million budgets and stuff like that, what happens if the game doesn't sell? The company goes
They
completely
literally
under.
have
It's
to
all
appeal to
over,
the
you know?
broadest
Like-
possible market, the lowest common denominator. Like they literally have to do their fiducial obligations to their shareholders.
It's
like
true.
they can't take risks.
So we're in between a rock and a hard place, which is why it should be literally criminalized to make remakes. That would actually help them. They would like that, because then they won't be forced at gunpoint by their shareholders to make them. But let me make my larger point of I always bring up in like this point of the discussion here that like one of my favorite games, it's like top 2 or 3, is Final Fantasy VII, and I love the other Final Fantasies too. That game was made by like a relatively large corporation at the time. It had grown. It wasn't like the biggest in the market at the time yet, but it was pretty big. It was pretty big, and they had a good amount of staff. They had a large budget and stuff when they were making FF7, and that game would not exist without like the capital behind it, because it was revolutionary at the time, pushing full motion video and 3D art and all that stuff, being like an early PlayStation 1 game, etc. It was impressive, so it's good that companies existed at the time to allow it to happen. And I think what may have happened, and this is a little bit of a doomer pill, is I think what we just had in that like 90s to 2000s era was we may have just sort of hit the peak of a thing that nobody really planned out, but has now kind of moved past it, which was there was a perfect intersection of sort of creative minds that started the industry. That Sakaguchi himself,
Yes.
had many ideas behind FF7 and the earlier games. He was the producer. He directed the early games, etc. That confluence with the industry itself growing. And at this moment right now, we are past that perfect intersection where the industry has continued to grow, but the artists behind it have sort of been pushed out of their position. Sakaguchi made some mistakes with the Final Fantasy movie, resigned from the company. He went on to make Mistwalker. People like his games. I admit I have not played them. I should do that sometime. But I didn't play the games just because Sakaguchi made them. I played them because a team that at the time I blindly trusted was making Final Fantasies. Now I know a little bit better. There's more. You have to know the people behind it that are putting the effort into it, which is another important thing about understanding how games are designed these days. You can't just trust the brand. You have to. Final Fantasy is the perfect example of this, because it just has totally changed what's going on behind the scenes under the label of Final Fantasy. The point being, there just was a moment in time where no one did it on purpose. It just so happened that the businesses were growing while like the artists were given enough capital to make something really interesting, but we are past that moment now. And now, I mean, people make fun of Square Enix, including me, all the time. They are just like lumbering along. They have no idea what they're doing. And they bought and sold, what was it? Eidos, whatever, the
Right.
Tomb Raider guys, Hitman, whoever that was.
Yeah, Hitman's pretty cool though.
I haven't played them, but people seem to like.
They're
but the
pretty
point is,
sweet.
they bought them and then sold them off because it just like wasn't working out.
Yeah,
so that's
they
pretty
did. I
embarrassing
forgot.
for them. They must have lost something from that. And I mean, I don't know what direction they're going in. And even the thing that's propping them up right now is Final Fantasy XIV is like the best MMO on the market, as most people seem to agree on that. Even I have some interest in playing it just because I'm curious. But it's not like my Final Fantasy, and it's those guys with like a very different skill set than the old Final Fantasies that were put in charge of the new numbered Final Fantasy 16. And so my Final Fantasy is dead. It doesn't exist anymore. There's a new thing that might be cool, and so I'll check it out as a Final Fantasy anthropologist and historian. But so anyway, to speak to that, it sounds like you agree, Mark, that like something just happened there, and there was like
I
a
can tell you
moment
exactly
in time.
what happened.
Please tell me.
So there is a key difference between the Final Fantasy VII team and a lot of the teams of that era versus, let's take the Resident Evil 4 remake team. The key difference is that Final Fantasy VII team, by the time they got to Final Fantasy VII and Sakaguchi and all his homies, they have made all the other Final Fantasies up to that point. They had built up a talent base and skill set and team dynamic to allow them to be fully competent and prepared to take on a project as massive and expensive as FF7. The talent was there to support the budget. With Resident Evil 4 remake, and I'm sure with a lot of modern Final Fantasies, that talent core no longer is there. The people who are put into these positions do not have that same strength and talent to be able to match these massive budgets. And so what do is they need to remake things that were made by more talented people in the past, or they need to try and play super, super safe and just go along with whatever's popular. And that's what we see.
I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it.
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should.
I think a modern example, though, would be the Dark Souls team, where they came out with Demon Souls and Dark Souls. But that team, as you've seen, they're still making really high quality stuff because the
everybody
talent
loved Elden
is
Ring.
still there.
Mm-hmm.
The talent is still there. So Elden Ring was kind of like their FF7. I would say probably is going to be in history one of those kind of like big peaks for the company, perhaps. But they couldn't just come out and make Elden Ring. They had to work to it. They had to build up the team and the experience to get that far.
I heard. I think it was, who was it? It was that famous music producer. He was on a podcast. And he was describing, what was his name? The guy who produced like Linkin Park, and he's got the big beard. You know what I'm talking about? What's that?
Rick
guy's
Rubin.
name? Rick Rubin. Yes,
It's Rick Rubin.
I once heard him describing the process of art creation, and I thought this was very insightful. I noticed it also happens to be very flattering for a producer as opposed to focusing on the artists themselves. But moving past that,
course.
he noticed that, or he observed that he doesn't sort of go for like the great man of history theory when it comes to artists. He sort of believes that trends exist in the world, and certain people happen to be sort of the fruit from the vine that flowers and capitalizes on that idea. So, for example, take Elden Ring. Elden Ring didn't invent the concept of like open world adventurousness. You could argue that like Zelda 1 invented that concept.
Elden Ring is
something.
grown up Zelda. It's Zelda for grown-ups.
Sure. But I mean, obviously, it's informed more recently by games like Breath of the Wild. And so those games, Elden Ring, I'm sure, took many ideas from that. And by the way, I don't even love everything about the open world design of Elden Ring. It just clearly,
Me neither.
Lives in that sphere of open world, doing stuff and collecting materials and building things and blah, blah, blah. So, whatever, just bring that up as an interesting note about how art is developed. Oh, by the way, speaking of From Software, I did want to go back because we've been kind of clowning on modern games a little bit. Let me introduce a positive thing about modern games. Going back to my first topic, which I forgot to bring up at the time, it was about like DLC and patches. One thing that it's another one of these things that's like the Ring of Power. It can be used for good or evil. Well, actually, the Ring of Power can only be used for evil, as I understand it. But forget that. It's a power that could be used for good or evil. And it's the idea of, like, for example, the Dark Souls 1 Artorias of the Abyss DLC. I struggle to find ways to dislike that much. There are some ways. But, like, the way that DLC can be used to sort of attach extra bits to a game that weren't there originally. One, yes, it incentivizes, like, not worrying about getting everything perfect with a base game, which is bad, and they might just be trying to milk money out of their consumers. That's true, and that's not good. But the good aspect is, legitimately, there's going to be some times when the creator, like, is making a game, and they're just in the position where, like, well, we can't fit in this story, we'll do it some other time. But the DLC idea gives them a chance to not even just, like, attach things that, in theory, if they delayed the game, could have been put in, but actually allows them to do things like, for example, like, add in new types of weapons in, like, a Dark Souls game that fill in holes that their original design didn't notice, and the developers only realized because the game came out, millions of people played it, feedback has started to come in, and then they can legitimately be like, oh, okay, let's actually, like, we aren't gods. We can't predict everything about the game when it comes out, and there is opportunity there to genuinely improve the experience in some ways that don't, fuck up stuff. And of course, the counter to that immediately is that does kind of fuck with the original concept of a game and can undermine things that exist. One example being the Smash Bros. DLC characters. There is clearly a feature creep that goes on with them, and they get kind of more and more powerful, and that makes the original characters, like, way worse. Like, for example, Incineroar. He was a new character in Brawl, or in the new Smash, whatever it is. Smash whatever. But then, like, Sephiroth comes out, and he's got a little bit more interesting things going on in his kit. And that feels like sort of the DLC creep, making sort of the older ones, less impressive. So that's just a phenomenon.
Like, they're making characters more interesting mechanically in hopes that you'll buy it, which kind of
to justify the price tag, probably.
Have.
Oh, Tekken.
Yeah, I can see that.
Tekken 7.
Oh, speaking of that, I don't know, is this still a thing they do? I remember when Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came out, and there was this big, like, stink made about, like, there's on the disc,
DLC
there is
disc,
data
baby.
for the characters that are on the disc.
Well,
that are DLC.
There's no excuse for that.
So I'm wondering if is that still a practice that's done, or did this thankfully die?
They don't do that, but I think mostly for optics. I think if they could get away with it, they absolutely would. But for optics, they don't.
You're lucky to even get the full game on the disc now, let alone the extra.
I wasn't sure if that's a thing where it's like that got reeled back a little bit, and it became a little, because that was
all you have to do is just be a little bit smarter, not put it on the disc, and just include it in the day one patch that everybody expects now.
They already do plan.
That was the board meeting, Nate. They sat down and said that. They're like, bros, come on. We got to be sneakier about this.
That's right. And so those sort of things have been not only just incentivized, but allowed and theoretically incentivized by the current market. You know what? While we're in a track of trying to bring up positive things, I will bring up a positive thing. Technology has evolved genuinely. For example, in my Mickle video, I brought up how the 3D interactivity going on between moving bodies in the 3D space is what allowed Shadow of the Colossus to be such an impressive, and it legitimately artistically made that game more impressive by the advancing technology. That was really cool. Glad that happened. That's good. Like, you couldn't do that in pixel art. Not the same way that it exists in that game. And also, just games looking better and more realistic. That is a cool thing. I happen to think that too many people pull a Square Enix and get too obsessed with it, but it is nice when games just look better. So I also can enjoy that when it's good.
I can definitely get very into, especially when we're talking about technical things, like, there's a lot of very positive things to bring up. Also licensing, too.
Yes.
If you're a independent developer nowadays, back in the day, if you wanted to own your own game, you had to do everything from scratch. You had to make your own physics engine, you had to make your own sprite displayer, you had to make your own music sequencer a lot of the time. Like, this stuff, like, that's what Pixel did with Cave Story. And if you didn't want to deal with all that bullshit, you had to go get Game Maker or Unity, and those things would be incredibly, like, they had these very restrictive licenses put on them. I think Game Maker, I don't know if this is entirely true, but from what I've heard from some of my developer friends, Game Maker actually technically owns part of the game you've made with them. So Game Maker actually kind of owns part of Undertale. I think Yo-Yo Games owns a certain part of it. Unity has this I think it's like this flat rate you have to pay of $1,000. You have to pay like a certain amount when you use it. Unreal has something like that also.
Right.
And nowadays there's a lot more frameworks and even big engines. Godot is this huge engine that's very similar to Unity, and it's the MIT license. So you can go and make your own game within a fully functioning engine nowadays, distribute it for yourself, and it's yours. It's your video game you made. You know, that's a very nice thing. And distribution is so much better than it used to be. You used to have to make your own website.
Distribution is a good point, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if a game like Cruelty Squad could get made, that's his game he made, and he puts it on Steam for, like, what, a flat rate of $100, and he fully owns it, you know, and it's his. And I really like that.
I mean, Steam does
that
take
couldn't have
part
been
of the
done
sale,
10 years ago.
but it is on a marketplace people can find and download it. You don't have to like sell copies out of magazines or whatever you had to do in the fucking 90s.
Yeah, and obviously you can make arguments about what's like a fair percentage for them to take, but I mean there is real value given by just being able to just upload your game and bam, you now can make money off of it, as opposed to get people to come to your website and download the exe or whatever it might be.
Which it's like a lot of people wouldn't even trust it, and there's still things to do. Like I know Godot still has problems with getting on a lot of consoles the way that Unity can, but these are things that are going to get better with time, and oftentimes that's an issue with those consoles having their own proprietary licenses and weird things that need to be worked out. And who knows, as these more open source things become more popular, we might see a lot of these big companies relinquishing on some of these, or getting a little lighter with their licenses so that more independent people can distribute it onto them. It will mean that it will be like Steam, where there's a little bit more garbage for sure, and maybe stuff that's not working exactly right. So you have to have this balance of like, it actually works on the console, it's been confirmed to work on it, and maybe publishers can come in and help out with that. But in that world, it's really expanding and getting so much better than it used to be.
Let's discuss emulation real quick, and how the thing about emulation is, while we all love it and it's a very good thing that it exists for the consumer, that isn't actually like saying that like modern games are actually still good. It's just a good thing that exists now, so you can play old games for free or whatever,
even that's kind of short-sighted, because a lot of people now, they make fan games and they make ROM hacks that are very cool and very interesting, right?
Mm-hmm. Project Base.
How many devs start with that? Yeah.
And that stuff isn't very possible without console hacking or emulators. It requires those things. So I think even the emulators.
Undertale began as a ROM hack for
exactly.
Earthbound or
the
something.
Earthbound Halloween hack, exactly, right? So there's a lot of significance to emulators being like good and being accurate, and they've gotten so much better now. Even PS2, which PS2 used to be like such a tricky one. It's gotten so much better. A lot of Dolphin developers are on it now, and a lot more games work.
People
on
are
it
emulating. I mean, this might not actually be a good thing, but like the Switch is emulatable right now, and people were playing the new Zelda before it
got released. Yeah, exactly.
Don't mean to suck my own dick too hard here, but back in the day, I had hacked my PSP, and I played Final Fantasy Dissidia before it came out publicly. Not just kind of a big deal.
What a legend!
Pretty
That's such a
impressive,
funny thing to brag about hacking the PSP, like the easiest.
I mean, everybody hacked it. I just followed a
I'm
YouTube
kind of
tutorial.
A hacker myself.
Yeah,
I hacked the Vita before it was like easy to hack. That was pretty hard.
I had to saw through a little bit of the battery though to make the battery.
Oh, did you actually do a hardware mod?
I did a hardware one for that. Yeah, back in the day.
Fancy.
Oh, did you do the battery one?
I sure did. Well, Pandora battery,
yeah.
the Pandora battery
baby.
hack. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I did that too.
I do maintain
sick.
that, like, if you hack a Vita or like a 3DS and like a Wii U, like if you hack those three, like you've got like such a great like library of stuff.
That's true.
But you can play like just a
them
library of great games until you die on all those.
I believe I
It's so fun.
played Mother 3 on my
360
PSP.
modded is really
Yeah.
good too.
Yeah. Okay, well, so let's just discuss...
Well, emulation. Let's talk
Emulation,
about emulation.
yeah, we
because
can keep
I
going
think
into
emulation
this, yeah.
is super important because we talked about games being an artistic medium. And basically, the companies, they don't really treat their IPs and games with that much care.
Yeah.
And it's emulation that picks up the pieces every single time.
Right.
Emulation is actually what's preserving the medium and what will preserve the medium into the future. It's not going to be your PlayStation 4 that you keep in your closet for 50 years. It's going to be the emulator that plays the PS4.
Bro, I've got
on a
PT
computer
on
in the
there right
future.
now. I am preserving history.
Yeah,
Right.
That is a big thing. Is that the emulation is so important for preserving a lot of these things. It's because computers, like, this is the problem with games, right? Is that they're this mix of like an artistic field and a technical field. So they require a computer to play them, and the computers just, by their design, go obsolete within a couple of years. And it's like you could go get, if you want to play MSX games, you could go buy an MSX and hook that shit up and hope that it still works. And
there was a time where that kind of advice
but it's
sense.
So much, it's so much
But not
nicer to
now.
actually download something that just basically will play the things you actually want to do on it, and it's very accurate. It's important. That's how you can play a game from 30 years ago and have a decent time with it compared to all the upfront costs.
So are you guys saying you guys don't want to spend thousands of dollars to buy $1,000 PCBs and play arcade games that way?
I would never.
Especially nowadays with like
the
the
most
collecting
viable way
market.
to go?
Hell no.
I almost forgot the arcade market, but yeah, even just like trying to find, I mean, God, at this point, even just trying to find like old like GameCubes at a reasonable price is a pain in the ass, let alone finding like an MSX or a fucking arcade cabinet.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, so it's a very helpful thing, but I guess since it isn't too useful to our modern games better than old games or old bad new good,
That's true.
right? That
we're just gushing about.
There is
oh,
one
man.
other thing about
I love my
emulators
dolphin.
that affects modern games a lot.
What's that, Mark?
There is one thing that they do is that so I think if Nintendo had their way and emulators didn't exist, what they would do is every single console they'd make you rebuy Super Metroid and rebuy all these games one more time. So you're going to buy Super Metroid 70 times. You're going to buy whatever Nintendo games. They're just going to make you keep buying the games over and over. And the only escape hatch out of that nasty practice is emulation, because otherwise you're going to just have to keep rebuying the same game again and again. And companies love this. That's why they hate emulation. They love, let's have them buy Super Metroid again. Let's have them buy it again. Let's keep doing it.
Their philosophy has shifted. I mean, when Animal Crossing came out, it was like loaded with like 20 free NES ROMs that you could play like the full game of Super Mario Bros., the full game of the original Zelda. Like you would never see them do something like that nowadays.
Hey, by the way, on this subject, wasn't there a thing? Were you guys talking about this before? That one of the Wii Shop games or whatever was just a ripped ROM that Nintendo used and stole from an emulation website. Which game was that again? Was it like Mario something?
It was one of the Mario games. I know that.
Yeah, it was like Mario 1.
There was some
I think.
shit in the header, right? And it was like,
So the header was clearly like Nintendo did not put this in.
So clearly Nintendo themselves
it was in the
happy
bytes.
to have it. Yeah, okay. So even they find it, I guess, a valuable
Sony
practice.
as well. Sony's guilty of this as well.
Yeah,
Really?
with the PlayStation Classic, didn't they do that?
PlayStation Classic, yeah. And Sony, they went hard back in the day. Not so much these days, but they went hard on the back in the day against emulators, against like Bleem and stuff. They lost, but they went hard.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do understand why they do it. I mean, if I was a company and I want to maximize profits, I understand why I would do that. But this kind of gets to like why I'm talking about this right now. Because a lot of people, when they make the argument that like, who cares, it's just video games or whatever, it's like, oh, okay, bro, you can think that. Do you like getting your money like taken out of your pocket over and over again? Is that a good thing? Or maybe it's good to like point out negative trends, and maybe you could get some sort of like social pushback so that you are less, I mean, abused as a customer, or whatever. It's not like that bad, but it's not ideal. It's good to point out the ideal.
It's short-sighted. I mean, I get the maximizing profit. Like in theory, that makes sense.
Sorry.
Like,
Let me summarize. Plausibility is not a defense. Just because they can do it, that's not an argument to do it.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
So people bring up like, it's legal though. Okay, not talking about what's legal, talking about what's good. There's a difference.
Not even talking about what's legal.
Yeah.
It's like it's plausible. Like yes, it makes sense to want to nickel and dime, make him pay for the new like Super Metroid on every system. But like, I think if they would just understand the value of like giving away the older games, like making them way easier to play for cheap or free, like you can get people into gaming, maybe more people want to buy the new Metroid if you could let them play the old Metroids for free and see how cool they were.
And especially if they find themselves getting diminishing returns, which I suspect they are, then they might might be like, I mean, a smart marketer might say like, okay, look, we don't care about these people. We want to milk as much money from them as possible. Let's falsely pretend that we're good people. I mean, they might be good people, you know what I mean? It's just a business. It doesn't care about morality. Let's just like give this thing away to generate goodwill so people will be more attracted to blah, 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 buy our system, do this stuff. They know if more people buy a Switch, they'll get X number of free games. That incentivizes people to just buy the Switch. Maybe we could, just spitballing here, but things like that are worth considering.
To return to the it's legal thing, I just wanted to say this. I find this a really funny defense because, again, only in games does this come up. Because imagine a Red Letter Media, they critique The Last Jedi, and in the comments, everyone's like, "But it's legal. I mean, it's legal for Disney to make
they own the
movie.
copyright.
It's legal, dude.
It's legal for George Lucas to remaster Return of the Jedi and fucking ruin it. It's legal.
What's the problem?
I mean, people make that argument, and I think they come from the position of like, I don't know. I think they, you know what? It is the hype culture thing going on there, and I want to get into a whole kind of thing about hype culture. But there is sort of I'm not saying that everybody who resists criticism is wrong. I'm not saying that. But there is a phenomenon where people do not like criticism, warranted or otherwise, and they want to be excited. And I'm just saying, if you can point out that, like, okay, but the point is still true, this is actually a bad thing, and they're like, just stop caring so much, that's not it is an argument, but there's nothing behind it. It is
an argument.
Yeah.
It's legally an argument to say that.
I understand the urge to want to like throw your hands up sometimes and just be like, fuck it, it's just games. Like, I don't really want to even just engage with this stuff. It's so frustrating, right? But I understand somebody wanting to do that. But the thing is that it's like, if you care about an industry, you should care about that industry's health. And if you care about the world, really, you should want the industry you care about to be in good health, because then it's a model for other industries and other communities, and they can look at that and go, well, hold on, we don't have to do necessarily like these very bad practices. Look at how people in the games industry do this. They do it really well. We can be like them. You want to encourage health in society and
you absolutely do.
You don't want to.
I suspect that a bubble has formed in the gaming industry, no doubt. And I'm not even saying like society will collapse. It's all over, bros. It's so completely, unbelievably over. It's just that I think that this phenomenon that I talked about a long time ago in this podcast of like there were the core players, like the hardcore players, and the ratio is going down of hardcore players, and it's more normos or whatever, and the number of overall players is going way up. That to me is what a bubble looks like, and I think that something could easily happen where people are just like, not so much like interested in this anymore.
TikTok.
We've peaked on what am I saying? Like, technology stops impressing people because we just hit that top, and you're getting 5 more polys on screen doesn't look any different to people. They feel like they've seen a lot of it before, and because artistry hasn't been encouraged so much in the industry, a lot of stagnation has fallen in, which there's still some good stuff, again, not saying it's all bad, but that's the sort of thing that leads to a decline over time. And then, I mean, just a company like Square Enix, which has grown so vastly and is like slashing off pieces of itself now. Like, this is what a collapse looks like when it's coming, when they're not in good shape and they haven't built themselves like a stable future. And I'm not saying that'll definitely happen. I just would not be surprised if things continue to go in a downward trend. And a lot of these very big companies, go up in smoke. Like that one company, Telltale Games, right? For a while, they were doing really well.
Oh, yeah.
They had lots of popular games, and they are gone. They're gone because they overstretched.
Right.
Yeah, it's gone.
They did not have a sustainable business practice. They just wanted to get as many licenses as they could get their hands on and start churning out literally as many as they could get their hands on, just praying that one of them is going to blow up like The Walking Dead did.
I mentioned this before, but I will just interject my overall thought on the... I said before that, like, we might be going through a thing with video games that the company... there was an intersection of like artistry with business, and it worked out well, and now we're past that. I think that there might be a phenomenon, maybe I'm too cynical about this, it might be literally necessary, because I see this in things like the anime sphere as well, where a company comes into existence, there's like it grows up, there's a little golden period where they make their best stuff, and then it gets into the bureaucratic nightmare of slow death over a long time as it milks its profitable properties. You see that in anime fairly
Gainax
frequently
is
these
literally
days.
like that,
Gainax
isn't
is
that?
exactly the case. They birthed Trigger, and it's not that Trigger doesn't make anything good. They recently made Cyberpunk, which a lot of people liked, but like the thing is, they started with their best show, Kill La Kill, and they have not reached those high points again, in my opinion. Anyway, I didn't watch Cyberpunk. Maybe it's even better. I don't think so. So it kind of feels like they were already on that trajectory. There's other companies like Bones that was birthed out of Sunrise.
Nintendo.
Nintendo. Wait, what about Nintendo? Is Nintendo just in the same boat here that they're
I
birthed
believe so. I think absolutely.
Well, a lot of Japanese companies suffer from this
Nintendo
kind
makes
of stuff.
what,
It's
one
very common.
okay-ish
but
game
I
every 3
I was
years
actually
now?
thinking more Gainax itself. Didn't they continue on when Trigger first started, and they were
Oh,
just
yeah,
making
they
like
still exist. They
visual
still
novel
exist.
adaptation garbage? Like they weren't even really producing anything.
They still
significant
exist. I'm not sure what their most recent animation like piece was, because they just kind of have stopped doing it. And Studio Kara was the other one I was going to mention of Hideaki Anno, who Eva was made by Gainax, but he broke off, and Kara is the one making the Eva rebuilds and the Shin Kamen Rider Shin. Those are the movie series. So my point being there, I suspect that there's a phenomenon that might exist where like these little companies, and we might just need to get used to this, like with art in general, when it's made by like a company, that a company is born, it's hungry for success. It has eager like young people who are aspiring to make something great and make their mark. They do that, the lucky ones, the good ones, and then they kind of coast on that. And it is inevitable because they're past that sort of fiercely burning, youthful, passionate era. And then they kind of get complacent and things go past. And so, like, the younger people, like Imaishi breaking off, who made Gurren Lagann, breaking off from Gainax to make Kill La Kill, that's going to be like, yes, the spark roars into existence as Trigger makes, like, something really cool. And then it kind of starts to taper off, and then maybe a young person from Trigger will break off and make a new series and make their amazing starter, show, and then it'll kind of trail off.
No,
as time goes
that'll
on.
happen. I mean, that's entropy, right? That's life. That's how
exactly.
all of this stuff goes, and especially in the artistic world, where like a lot of people are they're so hungry, they like get out of college or they get out of like school and they're really ready to do stuff, and like they grind harder than all the guys that are in their 30s. They work way harder, and they're way more passionate, and then they make they work really hard, they make their shows, they animate really well, they get to direct something eventually, and then they get into the position of being the 35-year-old guy, and now it's like, well, I want to have a family now. I want to do real life things a little bit more. I'm not that same kid,
As a man charging into his 30s, can confirm it's so fucking over, bros. It's completely, unbelievably over right now.
But that's there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I mean that's why we have
Something
kids.
is currently
that's
laying
why
in bed as he records because his back hurts. He can't sit at the computer anymore.
But that's why
destroyed.
it's good. That's why we have kids. That's why we raise like the next generation.
I mean,
and all
literally,
that kind of stuff, because they pick up that and then they go forward and they do that. And you're going to see that, with everything. Games are a lot harder nowadays though, because game studios, especially the AAA, are so big and they're so they're bloated.
I feel like this touches into something I wanted to say earlier, which is that it's like you could make the original Final Fantasy VII, which was like a huge AAA, massive fucking project, but the team size, compare that to the team size of the Final Fantasy VII fucking remake. It used to be like, you could have like 30 guys and they could be some industry veterans and they'd build some experience. Now it's just like, because the team size used to be so huge, they're just getting as many people fresh out of college or whatever and just churning through them.
Yeah,
and
there
like
seems to be an element
crushing
to
their
that.
creative
Yeah.
spirits.
Oh god, I mean, I can
Absolutely.
back in the day, being a game developer was like a bygone era. It was like a couple of people, they were in software, and maybe I'm mainly a programmer, but I can do music, and I can do some art, I can draw stuff, and maybe you'd hire like 2 artists or like a modeler, and you'd make your studio, right?
Yeah.
But nowadays it's so different, because kids nowadays grow up and they dream of making video games. It's like their big thing. So what happens when you're in a studio, or you're in an environment where everybody dreams of doing something? You have 5,000 applications for one position, and the company knows they're in the position of giving this person their dream, so they can exploit them. They can basically say like, yeah, I'm going to basically work you really hard. And then what happens is these guys, they're like they're 24 when they start, and then they're 28 and they go, I'm retiring. It's too much work.
I mean, I
because
mentioned
they got
earlier too, which is like the generation who made the video games we grew up on didn't grow up playing video games. So they weren't like a bunch of video game freaks. Like they weren't so desperate. They weren't so desperate to be in the video game industry because they were such video game heads. Whereas all the new generation, again, there's nothing wrong with loving video games, but like they're so desperate to be in it that they'll take less than adequate conditions.
That's what happens with you end up creating these inbred industries. Animation is a similar thing. Before we know it, we already have Digipen, right? This whole thing of like, it's becoming very inside. It's like you want to go to the Digipen school because then you'll get kind of raised up and then you can go work for one of the companies from the Digipen school. This is what happened with animation. It used to be, hey, I know how to do some drawing. Maybe I could do the in-betweens for you. And then that became this process of like, okay, now you got to go to the California art school that Disney set up and you got to do there. And that's how you make your connections. And then you can get a job with it. And nowadays, there's basically no entry into the animation industry because tweening and in-betweens are all done by the computer. Right. So there's it's a purely nepotistic
Koreans.
industry now. Yeah. And for video games, it's going to that direction. It's moving into that direction of like, everyone's so desperate, it's everyone's dream, and it's going to become a very like connections-focused industry. Where
and so in that way, I have some sympathy for like that environment because that's not anybody doing anything wrong necessarily.
No, it's not malicious. It's just the way it is. It's entertainment industry. Hollywood has this problem. Animation. It's just inevitable. Music is the same way. Everything is like this. Comics are like this. It's always going to be this kind of like extremely competitive, extremely like cutthroat kind of thing when you get to that. And I think it's just that we're now starting to see that with games, whereas like previously, it was normal with all the other industries, and we've just kind of caught up to it, I think. That's the big thing.
That makes sense.
Well, Cybershell also made a really good point, too, because I think there's a clear personality difference between the types that began in the industry. These guys were on the cutting edge of doing things that just weren't done before. So those types of personalities are different than the types of personalities who now enter an established industry. They're not that same personality where you're kind of probably a more out there, artistic, weird dude to begin something. And then you're kind of a different personality to jump on once it starts going, leaders and followers type of thing.
This might be that phenomenon a little bit. You know that one like meme image of like the three guys gathered around playing a game together, and they're like, it said that these are the founders of a game, and it's like the insiders, and then like one of their ancillary friends joins the game, and the tone begins to change as like a guy who wasn't uber dedicated, then a girl joins the game because that guy brought his girl, and it's so over. It's so over at that point. But we all know there is an element of truth to that. That when the goal of the game begins to diverge from like autistically obsessing about like a certain game mechanic or whatever to a social aspect, that does apply pressures to a system, and so there's an element of truth there. But I was going to say, speaking to that as well, because we were saying that like now people get into games in like an incestuous way. They grew up playing games. They want to make games specifically.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, it calls to mind, like, back in the day, there probably was a guy who was, like, the son of a stonemason or something like that. And he knew when he grew up, his dad's going to teach him his craft, and he's going to be a stonemason. But that guy, you wouldn't say that guy produced incestuous art exactly. And I think that the reason for that is kind of what I was just speaking to. I think that one of the issues is the motivations behind doing it become less about, I specifically love this craft and I want to produce it. And look, I'm a YouTube guy. Obviously, I have an ego and like hearing my voice heard. But I think the motivations that creep into like an art form of making something largely become, I want a piece of the glory of making this thing, and that, again, that does change sort of the incentive structure behind making something, and as opposed to, we're a bunch of weirdos, we're gonna sit around and, like, what's fun for us is to make the most, like, excellent over-the-shoulder camera positioning possible, and we're gonna workshop that for, like, a month as we're working on, whatever game it is.
Yeah, so, ego plays a big part. Ego plays a huge part in this stuff. I mean, and you're right.
I feel that social media specifically might be a factor in the last, 2 years.
You don't see also, you never see, you're right, you don't really see so many, family-owned game businesses. Maybe that'll change in the future, right? I mean, there's Maximum Mike, the guy who made Cyberpunk. He actually runs that whole thing with his family. It's him and his wife and his son.
Oh, the guy who wrote the book, or he made the game.
Like the guy who made the game, wrote all the books, did all that stuff. Yeah. He runs the company with his family. So I'd love to see that in games one day. But yeah, you're right. That I think the thing is that a lot of people that do work in games, they have kids. They go, I'm not going to teach my kid how to make games. I'm going to have him get into a normal career where he can make make money, where he's not.
I'm not even trying to say that, like, it's good to have a family business, though obviously there are some nice things about that. I'm just saying, like, the motivations of like, the stonemason that I'm describing here are, like, I have a craft to learn to, like, provide this service. Like, he's not gonna get famous for being a stonemason unless he's, he turns out Da Vinci or, like, some shit, but that's not the typical case here. And again, I think the existence of things like the internet and people wanting to be micro celebrities and whatnot, not every game, I'm not trying to say they're all like that, but it adds more pressures to the system, and it can attract a different demographic.
It's very depressing to see, like, a lot of people are wanting to make games, and it's all, like, not even games, but a lot of art, and it's all ego driven. It's all about, I need to be remembered. It's this existential thing. You should be doing things just because there's this great enjoyment that it fulfills you with, to be able to make something that you really enjoy, and you can look at it at the end of the day, It's
just like it's a saturated market. So I feel like even if you were the most pure intentioned guy who made the greatest indie game of all time, you still have to put on your hat and do the peacocking social media dance to get anyone to play your fucking game in the first place.
You need a marketing
How to stand out in this crowd. It used to be like there was only so many games on the goddamn Super Nintendo. Now it's like there's infinite fucking games out there.
I'll also bring up there's a positive element there, which is now, like, an indie game can get promoted because social media exists or something, and
it's a double-edged sword, absolutely.
Take Hollow Knight, for example. Hollow Knight got an amazing windfall of, like, good press due to, first of all, it was like one of the indie darlings or whatever. It had, like, a successful Kickstarter. It was on, like, Nintendo promoted it when it was coming out and stuff. It got involved in, like, their promotional materials. It came to the Switch, it was good. And so, good things can happen due to social media buzz, and a lot of those games simply wouldn't have existed in the past, and Hollow Knight is one of my favorite games that's been made over the last, maybe 5-10 years or whatever it is. So just pointing out more good things about modernity. It's not so boom, counterpoint. Old, good, new, bad, not confirmed, 100% true all the time. There are, in fact, some good things happening. But speaking of bad things,
look at us YouTubers.
Getting delayed.
You put me on a news station, I'll get fired tomorrow.
I want to get into the whole discussion.
It easy,
we've been talking a lot about, like, technical stuff here. I want to shift to sort of the social aspect after one more topic. But let's just toss around microtransactions specifically real quick, because I think there is a lot of negative to be said about them, and this is one of the things with the old horse armor debacle when it sort of first was getting discussed. It seems exploitative and not cool, but I guess the good thing is that you can kind of mostly avoid microtransactions in most, like, real quote-unquote video games if you're not playing a gacha, which is one big microtransaction.
Here's a question for the panel, because we all have very clear ideas of why microtransactions are often crappy and how they're used is almost always crappy. Can anyone think of, like, an artistically legitimate good use of microtransaction, like a game that would somehow be improved in the gameplay experience? I'm not talking about their budgets. I'm not talking about, now they can spend more money on graphics or whatever. I mean, like, in game, is it possible for microtransactions to serve that purpose at all? That, I think, is interesting to consider.
I'll make a defense for them, which is the best thing I could see is the best I can do is that it's basically harmless. But just for example, you could consider it's not a microtransaction, but they're a similar concept, like the Dark Souls 1 DLC. Like, you're buying something to add it to the game. But just simplify that. Let's say you can pay, like, 10 cents, a very low number, for, like, a cool costume to get added to your game, and you just like the costume. It's a cost-benefit analysis. Like, is any harm done? And let's say that costume is in particular, like, a really cool, meaningful thing. For example, in Sekiro, you can unlock the, like, Shura costume, where the wolf is like, he's gone evil mode. He's, like, glowing and weird. And I believe the way that you unlock that, I haven't done this myself, is that you beat, like, a boss rush DLC, which is cool and stuff. But I'm just saying, what if you could just buy that costume for, like, 10 cents? You don't have to do it, but it's a meaningful design of the character that represents something about him, and the way that they're able to incorporate it into the game, incorporating budget, and they need to make money, they can't do it for free, they have to justify it, is through a microtransaction. And it hardens the game in no larger way other than you can choose to buy it or not. The best I can do is any harm done by that? Couldn't that be a neat thing to have?
To me, everything goes back to, like, is this like encouraging people to whale? Like, are you encouraging people to like spend a bunch of money, like a slot machine? You know, it's like in the hopes that maybe they'll get something. If you're just flat out saying, hey, we have this part in the game, and if you buy it, you know, for $5, you'll get this thing. There's a guarantee that you're going to get something from your transaction. I think that's fine, right? It's the issue of like people that are very mentally unwell going and like spending thousands of dollars on WWE SmackDown phone game or whatever, and like all that kind of, like a lot of these anime gacha games where it's like people spending thousands of dollars. And it's like, why? It's like, is it because they actually care about what they're getting? It's like, no, it's because they're fucked up.
maybe you could consider
it is exploitative for sure. And it is funny to think that gaming began with microtransactions, putting a quarter in a Pac-Man.
That's true.
Yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe you could consider it sort of a vice. And everybody has vices, but in moderation, they can like add flavor to your life, even if they're technically a negative thing. If maybe you smoke a cigar once a year. Your son was just born. You want to smoke a cigar with your dad because you're celebrating. Like, who would argue that that's like a terrible thing for you to do? You know, like one time in your life or whatever. And in the same way, in small doses, it could be an okay thing. But it incentivizes
one
things.
scenario.
It's not even just about incentive. Is there explicit mention of like? Oh, sorry. I was just wanted to say, is there explicit mention of like within a lot of these games? Is there like an intention of like promoting that behavior?
Well, let me bring up a anti-art example that I absolutely despise, which is Kingdom Hearts 3, which is so. In the old days, Keyblades, like, they used to mean something, and, like, that was cool. Like, getting the Oath Keeper in Kingdom Hearts 1, it, like, meant something. Okay, that's out the window in Kingdom Hearts 3, basically, because you just get one for each island you visit or whatever, each world. If you start the game, I didn't even want this. I did not want it, but because I bought the game from like at a certain time or whatever, it came with a bonus DLC Keyblade that you can like buy as part of it's not technically a microtransaction, but I did not want it because now when I start the game and I'm Sora level 1 starting a new adventure, I'm supposed to have just the Kingdom Key, but in my inventory is this other Keyblade that has no narrative logic to it whatsoever and is extremely It fucks with my like integration into the story, and it just makes me mad. And people will say, "Nate, you're a loser incel. Stop caring so much."
I don't like pre-order bonuses. I really don't care for them. You start Fallout New Vegas, and it's like the first like 20 pop-ups. Like you have this lucky.
That's annoying too.
That's annoying too. Shut the fuck up! I have to pretend like I don't have it now.
Okay, but we did cut off. I cut off. Mark, you were.
How dare you?
Making a point.
No,
there. What were you saying?
I was thinking the one use I could think of that's an interesting use of microtransactions. Now, whether it's good or not, I think that's still up for debate. But an interesting one is returning to the arcade example, where I am an arcade player and I did go to arcades. I try to now, but there's so few left. But there is a meaningful difference when you are at the cabinet playing against someone and you got quarter v quarter and you are battling for that credit, and the winner stays on and the loser has to pay to play. Now, I think this could be very interesting if they did this in fighting games. Tekken Revolution kind of tried to do this, but it would be interesting if they did have a mode in like Tekkens and all this kind of thing called like pay to, I don't know, whatever. It'd have to be catchy. But basically the idea was you would put money up to play, and it would give that extra just juice to it.
Oh man, can you imagine what the journos would say if some game implemented this?
People would lose their minds. I think that'd be hilarious.
It would be fun.
Yeah, money matches, basically. Yeah, money match mode.
Yeah,
exactly,
they were like micro money matches. Essentially, the whole idea. It was just, it generated just a little bit of salt. When it's like, that it's not just that you lost the game. If you want to play again, you got to insert more money. And the other guy
what Ella was saying about being a whale, and it's like, it's funny because like the traditional microtransactions of the arcade, it's like the opposite, because it's like you put in one quarter in a Pac-Man, you lose, but you get better at the game. So it's like theoretically you could put in one quarter. And play the whole game
arcades
to the
are very
end.
different than microtransactions in how they actually operate, because they're so with arcade game design. I love arcade game design, and part of that is it has to find this perfect balance where if your arcade game is just outright robbing the player, they will not put another quarter in, and you will not gain money. But if your game is too generous, too easy, as a lot of games these days are, you can put one quarter in and you can play all day and they get no coin turnover. So they have to find that perfect difficulty curve, the golden curve, where it is just fair enough to keep you coming back, but still challenging enough to make you lose.
That's actually very interesting.
I think we've really lost that in game design now. And that's what makes arcade games my favorite, is they have that perfect difficulty curve of like, it's hard, but it can't be unfair because you won't keep playing. It has to be perfectly tuned to difficulty. Whereas now everyone just makes everything super easy because they want you to keep playing and it doesn't matter. So
they already have your
money.
money.
That actually is truly a fascinating point here, because obviously early games were inspired by arcades, since they were the primary place that people played video games early in the day. And that
Castlevania.
The way that it feels like games now are, you just pay like 60 or now getting up to $70, and boom, you're in the door, you get the experience.
People feel entitled to beat games now. Like, people get pissed off if like there's a huge difficulty spike and you have to just accept that you can't beat the game.
There definitely is that going on, and many of us here would be like, well, that's part of the challenge, that's part of the experience, that you improve and grow and move past it.
I would even say that's part of the artistic message of the game.
No doubt.
Is
no doubt.
integral to what the game has to say.
If you were playing, like, think about like back in the day, right? You have an NES and you buy Ninja Gaiden, right? That game takes like an hour to beat. The intention of that game was that you were going to come home, you were going to give it a shot, and you play like, and maybe you get to like the second stage and then game over, and then you go, fuck, I'll pick it up again tomorrow. The whole idea is that like eventually, within enough time, and as you keep playing and as you start to really understand the game and start to master it, you'll eventually beat it within like a month or so. That was like the way games used to be developed back in the day. It was with that kind of idea in mind, because a lot of them they were shorter and there wasn't as much they could do with the hardware. So I think that's sometimes people look at like a lot of old games like NES, even SNES, and they'll go, these kind of things, they're not the same as they are nowadays. They're not designed the same. Some people might even be quick to say, well, they're designed poorly. But it's not. It's just that there were different intentions back in the day with what the game was trying to do. That was the thing.
I would say it's designed well. Not that it's designed poorly.
Yeah, I don't think it's designed poorly at all. It's just very different.
Some NES games are crappy, but like the greats of the past, modern developers shouldn't be looking at those like, oh, those are antiquated. They should be looking at that like, wow, those are really tightly compressed and tightly designed. It's like the difference between trying to podcast for 5 hours and you're just waffling, and having a really juicy 1 hour podcast. Like brevity and compression of ideas, all that really pays off. Engaging.
But does it pay off to getting the most people to buy your game in the current market that we're dealing with? And I think that's the key issue here, because the incentive structure has changed, and the incentive structure changed, I think, following the way the technological forces, and specifically like the advancement in graphics, attracts consumers, and it attracts people to play the games now. And there's a behind the scenes phenomenon going on here where the way that games are marketed, the people they're marketed to, how they get people in the door, all of these sort of things changed behind the scenes, applying all different kinds of forces. So you're no longer doing what you were talking about, Mark, of hitting the sweet spot between making your player feel encouraged, a little bit frustrated that they lost, to put that next quarter in. They do not have to do that anymore. And things like that, those kind of phenomenon happening, I think are exactly the kind of like meaningful distinction that's changed in games behind the scenes, while we just kind of just consumed them and weren't paying attention. And now we got to go back and sort it all out.
Well, there's another objective metric of this, which is there's this whole website dedicated to how big, long, and bloated the game is, called How Long to Beat.
Oh, right.
And game reviewers view these metrics as almost always universally positive. So The Witcher is 1 million hours to complete. That's like, look at all that content, man. That is a universal positive. What's funny is I use that website myself, but like in reverse. I'll look up a game and it says an hour or 2 hours. I'm like, there we go. Now we're talking. Let's do this.
That's why Ubisoft Assassin's Creed games became endless like checklist simulators of just doing the same monotonous thing over and over again, because it really does like
there's a demand for it. There's a demand. People enjoy that. I mean, I got to admit, I'm playing the new Zelda game, and because I really like those games, I do love that there's lots of stuff to do, and I'm like, oh, there's so many like adventure. And Elden Ring, everybody just played Elden Ring, a similar phenomenon there. There's a lot to enjoy about that, but it's just not the only factor to be considered, and not every game should be like Elden Ring, even though Elden Ring itself is a pretty cool game. And
right, I mean, it's just funny because like you never go to the movie theater and be like, yes, this movie's 15 hours, I can't wait to go watch it. It's like people understand that there's a benefit to being tight and short.
When I'm really into a game, right, like I do have that kind of thing, like, oh, I really wish this would just kind of go on forever. I'm really loving it, you know, I really love everything about this, but it's not, you know, the ideal experience is it should be as long as it needs to be. It shouldn't be bloated or stretched out. I don't like. There's a lot of games I play that are stretched, you know.
Right,
so
exactly.
long.
I'm gonna call it immature to want to expect a game to just keep on going.
Yeah,
you know, there's a human.
You want a game
thing
to keep on
there
going? Play an MMO.
Yeah, exactly. Play an MMO or play one of those competitive games you can just play forever.
But I don't mean to be. I don't want to talk down to
games
people.
Are a little bit different. Though,
I like that
because
Elden Ring is a lot.
People want novelty.
Right.
Yeah, I don't mean to say long games are bad. I loved Elden Ring too.
Right, exactly. So I don't mean to talk down to people. I'm just saying.
Well, I think the difference, the difference between Elden Ring and some of these other like really long bloated games is like the difference between you pick up War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. That's a massive book, but that's dense.
Yeah, which he bloated just to fill runtime, no doubt. And it's not like most of those pages matter or anything.
But then you take like a stack of Hardy Boys, and nothing against the Hardy Boys, but you take a stack of Hardy Boys. Yeah, okay, we got a similar page count here, but which one is using that page count more effectively? And I think that's what we have with games is Elden Ring, while I think it is a little bit over bloated still, I mean, it's still using that space much more effectively than a lot of other games are. So I think that's something that never gets commented on. We just comment, oh, it has 40 hours of gameplay. But how effective is that 40 hours of gameplay? Is it effective, juicy 40 hours, or is it a bunch of bloat and waffle and fetch quests and backtracking and garbage?
Right. Yep. Very true. Very true. Well, now that we spoke a little bit about microtransactions, let's do as I said, and let's shift gears a little bit, because the other sort of aspect, we've dove into a bunch of specific technical issues that existed now and talked about some good stuff. I did want to talk about sort of the extra layer on top of the games themselves, which is sort of the media landscape that exists above it all, commenting on it, and This includes things like reviews, reviewers, YouTubers that now exist, social media commentary, all that stuff. Because I will now bring up the thing I talked about in Mickle, which is hype culture, or the cult of positivity, which there is a phenomenon, I do feel, especially because everybody can be online, connected all the time. We want to hear feedback. People want to promote something new when it comes out. There is a sphere that does not want there to be criticism of something new, and I feel that it's sort of it's rubes that sort of go along with it. Not that everyone, not just because you like a game are you a rube, but it's people that find themselves angry at criticism. On that Reddit that you mentioned before, True Gamers or whatever it was,
True Gaming or whatever it is, yeah.
I'm not saying that those guys are wrong to view it that way, but that's one way to engage with a game would be to okay, the game is what it is. I'm just going to enjoy it as much as I can now that I've bought it. Okay, that makes sense. But there's another area of discussion to be had, which is about, being critical in order to hopefully make future developers hear complaints. I think after Cyberpunk launched and it had huge fucking problems, I like to think that other developers were let's avoid that for ourselves. Let's not release an unfinished, extremely buggy game. This is a silly example, but for real, they were I think people probably learned a lesson. Don't do that if you don't want your stock to tank massively, at least in the short term.
I mean, that was a perfect example of a game that was way too hyped. They were constantly hyping that up for years and get people's expectations up so high. I mean, I can't put it all on them. It's also on the consumer for, having those expectations. You'll always be better off not getting way too hyped over something.
I'm just a big one that I believe in criticism. I think it has a place to add to the discourse in a meaningful way. And obviously, that doesn't mean to just say bad things even if you don't really believe them or be ridiculously over the top with criticism.
Is that even criticism itself?
Good point. That would just be, I guess, sour grapes just being bitter for no particular reason. I don't. I mean, I can get that way sometimes too. I mean, we all can from time to time. But it's I really want people to engage critically with something like a review. And let's talk about that, because this is maybe a little bit. I mean, I talked about this in Mickle again. I feel like people could take this the wrong way, but let's not lie to ourselves. There definitely are financial incentives to reviewers and YouTubers as well to just be positive about something, especially if they have some corporate involvement, with more and more do these days. And all I'm saying is that means they're no longer going to be objective, and that they should be considered as marketers, not reviewers. Like, maybe there's some guy who's involved who's like truly proved himself to be like a diligent steward of his professional credibility, but I would argue that guy just shouldn't get involved directly with a company to begin with. But yeah, I mean, review copies are a thing that exists today. And
review embargoes.
Review embargoes are a real thing. Cyberpunk humiliatingly would not let reviewers use footage they recorded themselves. They had to use pre-prepared footage for the reviews.
Nothing's shady about that.
I know, not shady at all.
There's
Not shady at all. They're not trying to hide anything. Yeah, they did that, and that was not good. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say that a new phenomenon that exists now that didn't exist 20 years ago, and there were. I mean, things like Game Informer that were, I mean, they were sort of insiders. They were given copies to review of things. But at least with those guys, they're professionals, There's a certain expectation that they'll take it seriously. And if they don't, like, there could be direct consequences. The thing about in the modern internet era and whatnot is just with, like, online reviews, especially with YouTubers, you can't really know. You can't really know if somebody is, I guess I'll just say, compromised in one way or another. You just don't know. Even as little as being given a review copy of something. But yeah.
Yeah, and the crazy part is, I think a lot of this, even some YouTubers may not even realize, like, hey, what is driving me? And am I myself, I think there's a lot of unconscious to this as well, where if you're just wanting to please your audience, and if your audience is bending you a certain way, you find yourself all of a sudden shilling for things you probably shouldn't shill for, defending things you probably wouldn't otherwise defend.
It's even more insidious than that, or maybe not insidious, but it's even more. It slips past you. Don't even think about it, because the other aspect of this is what a smart company does when they want someone to market their new game that's coming out. Let's say a remake of an old game that everybody loves, something like that. They would take a person that already is positively disposed toward them, and you can just tell this, and they just get that guy to talk about it. Right,
folks.
They give it, yeah.
I have applied for them. I do not get them.
I have not applied for them. I've never received a review copy for. I mean, I don't make like that many numerical videos about video games or anime or whatever. But I did shill for a game one time as a paid sponsor for that, like, whatever that, like, shitty play as, like, anime boat girls. Like, I did do it. I'm proud of it. I said you could play this game and you might enjoy it. I wasn't reviewing the game. I just shilled for it.
Well, there's a distinctive between distinct advertisement and hidden advertisement in the form of a review. It was a clear advertisement. That's the huge problem.
Yes, it's where that line gets blurry.
Just a TV station.
Is the issue. Yeah, exactly my point. That's what I was getting to. So I'm based. You're cringe. Don't criticize me. I'll end your life.
What I was wondering was, how does this happen? How do you think this is in other fields? Like, do you think movie criticism? Because in my mind, I always thought film critics were more likely to be able to give a bad review to something. But I see this exact same type of culture. I think Red Letter Media even talked about this, where it's like, they'll invite all the Star Wars YouTubers to come watch the new Star Wars movie early under
it's ubiquitous
the
now.
Implicit assumption that they'll give it probably a good review. Otherwise, they're not going to be invited back next time.
And Tom Scott made a great video about this that I put in Mickle, where he just, like, if you're a car reviewer, I mean, you got to review the car, so they have to, like, give you access to the car, and you probably developed a reputation. Well, what if you're just, like, kind of critical? There are other car reviewers they can get to review their car. Next time, let's just give it to the other guy, because he gave us a more positive review. No one's doing anything wrong there in the immediate. Everyone's sort of doing what they need to do. But this is why it's good to step back and analyze from a distance, that there are things here that are just, they're not ideal for, like, consumer advocacy. And it's good to point that out so that you, the consumer, can be aware of that happening. So, for example, like, getting access to, like, a movie preview in, like, a Star Wars celebration where everybody is there because they love Star Wars so much. You really gonna give that a 7, bro? You really, maybe just bump that up. Like, an 8 goes across a lot smoother, Then they'll invite you back. And it's just, people don't like to think of them as villains. Most of these people aren't villains. It just subconsciously, it pushes you, it incentivizes, and that's sort of the little dance that goes on behind the scenes, and it just tips the scales a little bit and helps people out. So there's also paid reviews. I mean, that has happened historically, but typically that's not like the most common one these days, as far as I know.
It just feels like they don't even have to be like, give us a 10 or don't. It's like, it's all the implication now.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can all not have to say a single word about it. And I'm not even trying to say that like there are villains here. I'm just pointing out the incentive structure, which I think is what's really going on. Were you saying something, Mello?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of focus on the like reviewers, right? Like these guys that are like, their names are out there and you can see what they're doing and they release certain reviews and everything, right? But I'm schizophrenic, right? But when I see like discussions of games, like a lot of the times, like, or even anything, I'm always just like, I can't help but feel like a lot of the people talking about it are just shills, like secretly paid shills or counter shills, like trying to be like, oh yeah, man, this new game that's coming out in 2 days, it's going to be really, really cool. Here's the box art on the OP of the thread. Like, I just can't help but feel like even when it comes to discussion, even discussions are like tainted by like these secret operations to like slowly shill the game, or this person's competing. Let's get some of our like interns or whatever to go and counter show and say, no, that game sucks, or this thing sucks.
I mean,
can't.
First of all, those phenomenons definitely do exist. They're not imaginary completely. They are out there. But on every,
I know why they exist.
The thing is, on any individual level, you can never truly know yourself. So, like, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. It's so hard to trust
discussions nowadays is the problem. Like, and especially with the AI stuff, it's going to become even harder, because then you can set up all these things and then just have them automatically reply. You're just going to have bots responding to each other in threads. Like, it's just going to be a nightmare. You'll have no idea what real opinions are.
But like I'm talking about how like a positive, like the cult of positivity exists.
Yeah.
And it just.
Even,
I want to say, like, why? Why does that matter?
I'll explain why.
Yeah,
it's
please,
because
Mark.
that is how you move up. That is how you move forward. So let's say you're a brand new channel and you want to start moving upward. You want more audience. You want more connections. You must follow this path. It's not a question of if someone's contacting you secretly and saying, hey, man, shill this, if I want to move upward, I must join in. And so they don't have to directly contact you. They don't have to send you messages on Discord. You just know, if I want to move forward, this is the path I must walk. And so that's why you have all these little channels out there. They have no connections. They have no influence, but they want on the train. They want to join the party. So they will gladly jump in and start shilling and pushing, and they can actually be a lot more aggressive because they have nothing to lose either. They're going in and they want in.
And so they might well be totally clear-eyed individuals who see angry, bitter incels such as myself, and they're like, that guy sucks. He's just being critical for no reason about this thing. I know that it's really good, so I'm going to bring up all the good points about it, sort of as a response to that group. And then, I mean, you can sort of end up in sort of like a tribal situation where there's like I sort of loosely have two poles in mind. There's the insiders and the outsiders. And by the way, I'm not going to pretend that there isn't also a certain incentive structure in place for people that have classified themselves as an outsider, and then they can appeal to an audience of like bitter, angry people such as themselves. I'm just saying, like, that can exist as well, and you can absolutely make that claim.
Exist.
And people make that claim about me sometimes. That's totally fine. You can do that. I like to think that I show that I have integrity by being honest, but some people think that I'm just like bitter about things and I take it too far. That's fine. You can absolutely think that, but at the very least, I'm not getting direct money for it. But you know what, to be fair though, I'm not saying that they're getting direct money for it either. There's an incentive structure in place, and you got to be consistent that it exists on both sides. I would argue that one is a much more powerful force than the other, but
because one has money and one doesn't.
One has money, but you can acquire an audience though. You can appeal to a certain audience, and with YouTube, it can if you play to that specific audience by, say, being very critical in general, that can warp your opinion too. So that I'm aware that exists as well. I try to resist it myself. I just try to be honest, but yeah, go on.
That kind of came up with my Resident Evil 4 remake, actually, because, there's always these forces that just battle each other on every avenue. And if you're engaging in critique, sometimes people will say like, this guy is just out there. He's out here to hammer on anything new or anything that isn't old or whatever it is. But the problem with that is I do see people in that camp as well, but the problem is that they miss the thread a lot too, because they'll start just hammering on things that's like, wait, no, you didn't actually critique this. And then they'll get themselves in these really weird situations where they're defending things because of social reasons, but the actual thing is a piece of garbage. And as a critic, you're like, yeah, that's all cool and all, but what you're defending is a big piece of garbage.
I feel like some of like the Disney remakes, for example, are in that
Disney
category
remakes.
where people just, I don't even know why, but like, I mean, nobody likes the Disney remakes that I'm aware of. Like the Lion King one, why did they even make that? It's like it's not even live action. It's like mostly CG. It's supposed to be the quote unquote live action Lion King. They didn't even like do the thing they set out to do. You feel it in all sorts of arenas. That's why this is a discussion not just about video games, but about all types of media.
Right, but my point was that a lot of that is not based in actual critique of the media, as in talking about the actual composition and structure and story and what, all these different elements. It's most like, okay, these guys have that opinion, so I will have the inverse opinion, and it can lead you into weird situations when you do that.
And on both sides, it's good to make sure you're not just arguing with like a tribe that you don't like. It's good that you try to stay, fact oriented. And if you think that
you're gonna have funny, weird overlaps at times. That's why some people like the Electric Underground doesn't make sense to them, because they're like, oh, I think I have him pinned, and then all of a sudden, oh wait, this isn't overlapping with what I thought, because it's not socially based. It's about how is the actual quality of the product.
I can assure you, despite my opinions on things, I do occasionally have sex. Can confirm.
Oh, goodness.
On the subject of the cult of positivity, I wanted to ask you about your experiences, Mark, with Nintendo Life. This feels like an appropriate place to bring that in.
The ultimate cult of positivity.
Yeah, so could you just, so you were a freelancer for the magazine or website Nintendo Life. How long were you doing that for?
A few months. I was kicking out those reviews. I did a number of reviews, I think 4 or 5.
And did you appear on their website?
The funny thing was...
Sorry.
Yeah, it's on their website. You can look them up. So I don't know if Nintendo Life allows you to actually search for writers on their website. I'm hoping, but you never know. But basically, it is a funny situation because they brought me on to review shmups because I'm the shmup guy and I'm all passionate about them. And like, oh, this guy's he can fill out page length. That's for sure. So let's get him in here. So the funny part is that the first 2 games I reviewed were genuinely great games. The Darius Collection and Esperade, both fantastic releases. And so those first 2 reviews, everything was sunshine and rainbows, bro. I'm giving them now. They're changing my scores around a bit. They're adding things in there that I thought were cheesy, but for the most part, it all sort of
changed your scores.
Well.
To what degree? Are we talking like a point or like 0.1?
Yes, point or two.
That's still quite a bit. That's not...
Well, the funny one was that I gave one a very high score, and I gave the one... They both got high scores, but one of them I gave a higher score than the other, and I said, this is the best shmup on the Switch currently. And then but then they dropped my score down to match the other game. So people in the comments were like, yeah, but then why'd you give it the same score as the other game?
That's a good question.
Why would you say it's better than the other if the score... I'm like, something must have happened between me writing it and it getting published that changed the score.
Fascinating.
But
okay.
yes.
Okay.
But yeah, so that did annoy me because it created an inconsistency. But so those first 2 reviews were mostly perfectly fine because I was, it was positive. They want positive. It all worked. But then... the Psycho Collection came, dun dun dun, and it was a big piece of garbage. And let me tell you, the kind of uncomfortable thing is that the Psycho Collection was a re-release, and so they actually had a previous review of the same game. And the previous reviewer gave this game a 9 out of 10.
Oh,
and I gave it like a 5 or something, and I was like, hammering. I was just going so hard. The input lag, the lack of features. This is garbage. This sucks. This is an insult. And I'm a big Psycho guy. So this would be like if they did a crappy port of Final Fantasy VI or something. And, you'd go hard on that. So I was going hard on how crappy this port was. And then they did another one. They did another set of ports. And I went hard on that. And then there was this like random smaller indie game that I gave kind of like, it's all right, but it's not that great. And then I gave another game a negative review, and they're like, and then I never heard from them again, basically. I was going too hard on but all of the games but you could see a nice spread where the kind of okayish game, I gave an okayish score. The crappy ports, I gave bad scores to. And then the great games, I gave good scores to. So you saw the whole range of me giving various scores and analysis.
Well, I have to raise for journalistic integrity purposes. Mark, you're cringe. All right, you're cringe, and Nintendo Life just recognized that fact, and they didn't want you there anymore. How do you know?
The funny part was,
yeah.
The funny part was the comment section of my reviews versus other reviews, because I would actually go into the comment section, and I pride myself on being someone who interacts in the comment section, and even if you're being sort of critical of me, I'm going to try and talk to you and reason with you, like, like try and lawyer myself to you and win you over. So it was funny, like, my reviews actually had incredibly active comment sections, and some people were like, bro, you're cringe. Some people were like, bro, I appreciate this. There's like a real review on the site. That's kind of cool. But yes, I was cringe, indeed. Twitter was like, yeah, you're cringe. You're out of here, buddy. So, but what's funny is in time, my reviews actually were good because the developer who saw my reviews, they actually patched a lot of that stuff in the Steam port. That's the funny part.
That's
all
your
the stuff I
claim, at
complained
least.
about.
I actually think that they just did it from the start and that you're lying right now to cover your tracks. That's my theory.
Yes.
How can I prove
Indeed.
otherwise? So the claim here is that you were kicked, basically, or rather, they'd be like, well, we would never kick someone for that. But they didn't invite you back to do more because you were increasingly critical, and they didn't like that.
If you look at the reviews and the tone of that site, I stood out like a sore thumb.
Sure,
I mean, it's not a mystery. It's not like, Hardy Boys, get in here. How did he not end up continuing? They gave Bayonetta 3 a 10 out of 10.
Wow.
Madness. I mean, this site is, cult of positivity, and they are, they're Red Cloak. They are the ringleader. I mean, they never give negative reviews, and here I am just hammering out these negative reviews. Yeah, my fate was sealed. But
Interesting.
But I actually really enjoyed the experience because I liked seeing the other side of it. I liked seeing what it is like to be in the review space so that I have a more hands-on understanding of how that is.
And I mean, for those who doubt that, like, anybody could, in theory, be, like, compromised, or that reviewers have incentive structures in place to, like, be more positive or whatnot, I mean, hard to argue with a hard example right here. This seems like just one example of that taking effect.
Yeah, and there's always the plausible deniability, because they didn't, like, it would have been great if they messaged me and said, bro, you are reviewing stuff way too negatively, you're gone.
Yeah.
But you're never going to get that in writing.
Yeah, they don't want to incriminate
for
themselves.
all I know,
Of course,
I am still a freelancer with Nintendo Life. For all I know. It's been 3 years, 4 years, however long it's been. Any day they could message me, hey, you're back.
Fascinating.
That's the irritating thing with being a freelance, man. It's like you just get like dropped all of a sudden, and there's like very little accountability because there was never like a contract really or a significant one. It's like, God damn it,
I knew my time
stop
probably
talking
wouldn't
to
have
me?
been that long.
Yeah,
because I was like, oh, they're hiring the Electric Underground. They're bringing. I don't know if they know what they're bringing on here. Because they probably saw my positive reviews because this happened after my M2 reviews, and M2 are incredible. And their games are incredible, and they're the highest quality releases.
It feels like, whoa, I bet this review was good for, like, the market capture of this game. Let's get him to give good reviews to our game so they also get spread around.
And then I'm just hammering their awful ports, and they're like, what have we done?
Yeah, big mistake, guys. It's almost like different games must be reviewed differently and are different levels of quality.
Madness.
Okay, let's talk nostalgia. Because I know that you are a big fan of nostalgia, Mark, for example. You love it. You think that it only introduces good things into the world, and there are no negative aspects to it.
And I think it is a very valid mode of analysis. So basically, the more nostalgic something is, the better it is, and the less you can critique it. I've always felt that way.
Cyber, you're a man who enjoys a Sonic game from time to time. Do you find that to be, like, is nostalgia factor when it comes, like, the Sonic franchise, is it in any way helpful, or is it, like, a distraction and blinds people from engaging with the series in a, in, like, sort of the way that developers would want them to? And any thoughts?
It's interesting because, you know, this isn't like a unique to the Sonic fandom, I guess, but it is like I'm nostalgic about the Genesis games, which I played when I was a kid, and I'm like, there's games I played when I was like a teenager, like Sonic Heroes, which I'm hyper critical of, and I can like recognize all the flaws of. But then I'm talking to kids who played those games when they were like little tiny kids, so they're completely blinded by nostalgia goggles or whatever. So yeah, you're always talking to people who have like they're nostalgic for different things, and so it can be even hard to even get people to like agree on like basic fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. And I know, like, you know, I grew up with like Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts and stuff. I obviously have massive biases myself, and if I played many of those games today, I probably would be less forgiving of them, even though I would argue that there's much artistic merit to be found in all of them. But like my particular attachment to those things, I have no doubt is somewhat swayed by the time in my life that I played them, and you know, the other, like, if it's your first exposure to like a new kind of idea and you're impressed by that, that's gonna be more impressive to you, even if you then play a game that came out like 10 years ago that did the exact same thing. It's the one that, you know, hit you at the right time in your life that'll impress you. But we're living in a time right now that it feels like nostalgia, or I mean, not even nostalgia, but just like marketable IPs being, you know, all the resources mined out of continually until there's nothing left. It feels that force is designed to capture the money of millennials a lot of the time, as opposed to truly meaningfully add something to like a particular story. Say you want to make a sequel like 20 years later to a game, and you're like, there's like an artistry here that I want to do. Or, you know, you want to make a remake because there are specific things you want to do more. I mean, I won't even try to go into the specifics about this. People know that I am not a fan of remakes. I think they should be criminalized. It's the only smart way forward. They have to be banned so that people will just stop making them. There's a couple good ones, but I will happily, you know, Band of the Hawk, or not Band of the Hawk, God Hand Berserk sacrifice them to get rid of all of them. But
they can go through. They can appeal to the court, at least. They can go through litigation.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Maybe they'll get through.
Because some of them could be allowed to exist if they're good enough. But they have to go through a screening process. At the very least, the default is no. They will not be allowed to be released, and you go to jail until proved otherwise. Yeah, you want to speak to this any more, Mark? Because I know that you were just working on a book about nostalgia. Correct?
Yeah, nostalgia's poison. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What are you, some kind of nostalgia critic?
I wanted to say that too, but I was like, oh no, I better not.
That's an interesting one.
Why did I
I'm
even
not
think of
supposed to
that?
badmouth people specifically. I've been told, so I won't do that. But I will say, I will say,
you have been forbidden from mentioning specific names. But it'd also be funny if you said them and I bleeped it out so that people could guess. You want to just say a name? I think that's funny.
Yeah. Well, nostalgia critic for sure. Oh my god.
But well, we all criticize nostalgia
his
critic.
His fate has been sealed though. Like he's one where it's like, now the horse is down. I don't feel the motivation to kick him because he's done. You know,
I agree. I agree. It's no longer
now the horse is cooked. It's less fun. I like to go after. Never mind.
Ever since that brick in the wall, review happened and people were like, "This is a nightmare." They were right. It was a nightmare, but it's he's no longer a guy above you. He's far, far below us now.
Yes, he's fallen from grace.
Exactly.
So I was saying something about nostalgia. I had this. Oh, okay. How deep in the site? How dark do we want to get, or how
let's go
meter?
mid-level.
How high on the realness meter should we go?
Mid-level real.
Okay. Well, I think part of it. I think it is something specific to millennials. Millennials hate. I am a millennial. Mm-hmm. On like 100% millennial by every definition.
Proud self-hating millennial myself. Yes. Indeed.
Yes, indeed. I think that it is something particular to the millennial generation. Millennials say it's not. I think it is. And I think part of it is, and this is kind of, again, a little depressing to say, but I think it's because millennials, we kind of peaked early. We had these very glorious childhoods and early adolescence where we were the hope of the universe. We were going to change everything for the better. We're going to fix the world, fix everything. We were the golden children, and it didn't quite pan out that way. And I think a lot of millennials have this attachment to their childhood that's incredibly strong. I think much stronger than older generations where their childhoods, they were not very fun. They're out and they had to work or went to crappy school. Like their childhoods kind of sucked. But our childhoods were amazing, incredible. We had like the best childhoods ever. And I think it's like, the guy that was popular in high school and then he's kind of washed up. Like that is us with childhood. Our childhoods were so good for the most part, for most millennials, that it is just hard to match that.
I mean,
And so
obviously,
think we
there were
have this-
millennials with you mean like generationally?
Generationally.
On a general scale.
Generationally.
Yeah, obviously.
Yes, there were millennials who had awful childhoods, of course, but generationally, we're kids during like just so many peaks in culture and economy, and like things were just kicking when we were kids, and we were going to change the world. Our parents were like, "You guys are it." I remember so many classes where the teachers like, "I am so proud of you guys. You guys are you're so smart." Every millennial thinks they're a genius.
I think
too.
now
we're all
the
geniuses.
the Gen Zers, they laugh about how it's so unbelievably, completely, totally over now, and like that's the joke among Gen Z.
Yeah,
that it's
that's
over.
kind of because I mean I'm a little bit in that. I'm kind of on that edge, right, of like the millennial Zoomer things. Because like when I was growing up, I can't remember anything prior to 9/11 and the dread and like the fear and all that, right? So it's like that is very funny. That must be crazy, right? You grow up and it's like the 90s are a very peaceful time and everything's going well, economy's pretty good, and then it's just all of a sudden everything gets thrown for a loop with that, and then the financial crisis. You know, that's insane.
Well, okay, so
Like,
let me just
I
speak
didn't
to this
think
though.
about that.
So the millennials aren't like the only people making this. So is your argument that because millennials are the target audience, that's
Yes.
the issue? Okay, yeah, I see.
Yes.
I see.
And the thing about millennials that separates us from other generations, I brought up the Berenstain Bears and other, like, the older generations before us had distinctive periods of childhood, adolescent, adulthood, very distinctive, very clear cutoffs. So when they look back at the properties of their childhood, they view that property through that is a child's property. That was a part of my childhood, distinctive. Millennials, we don't have that. Our childhood properties, we moved up along with them. We grew up with Harry Potter. We grew up with Nintendo. We grew up with Star Wars-ish, with the prequels and all that. Like, all these properties, we grew up alongside, and they kind of moved along with us. So we have this insanely strong attachment to them that's very, I think, distinctive from other people.
Okay,
So,
I'm gonna have to push back
Nintendo-
on this just a little bit. I don't think this nostalgic shit is quite as localized to the millennial generation as you think, because I grew up my entire life being fucking bombarded with nostalgia for the 80s that I felt absolutely nothing towards, and it was all for those Gen X cocksuckers who would shut the fuck up about Ghostbusters and all this other retarded shit that I don't care about.
I was gonna say
But
Star
how could you
Wars,
have
right?
this-
Like Star
how-
Wars.
And
is
Star
the
Wars,
best
that's a
example
Gen
of
X thing. That's not a millennial thing.
nostalgia.
Just as we had the shitty prequel movies.
I think obviously this isn't going to be like totally localized to one generation or anything, but I think the concept that might be that might be going on here is that I find obviously you can't like blame a millennial, like he didn't choose the situation he was born into.
Right.
I find
Right.
like I think that the issue at hand, because obviously Star Wars was hyped up, and but now Star Wars is being milked like today, as of like 10 years ago.
Well, Star
it
Wars
began.
is a little bit, it is a little bit more for the Gen Xers. But
it is. Well,
that was one example.
The reason that I mentioned that is because I think what is different about it is that, I mean, Star Wars was like the peak cultural moment of like, what was it, like the 70s and 80s or something. It's that now we now have technology. I personally put a lot of the blame on the internet and social media. I was watching a clip of David Bowie the other day, and he was just talking about, it was like 2001 or something. He was doing an interview, and he was like, it might have even been before that. And David Bowie said, like, the internet is going to totally change the way everything works forever. And the interviewer was like, what do you mean, bro? It's just like a means of getting and sending information. It's like not that big a deal. And David Bowie was like, no, it's like aliens just landed on Earth. It's completely, unbelievably over, bros, for all time. I mean, he was just saying that like everything is changing now. And I agree with that. I think, obviously, information technology had been evolving for quite a while there. You got what's that thing with the Morse code, and then you got radio, and you got television, and now we've got the internet. All along, the printing press was like the original thing of that back in
right.
What was that,
Yeah.
like the 1600s or something. That has been progressing. I see a technological thing that changed that is fundamentally changing the way that like humans relate to each other. And I think because it exists now, and that also the fact that like I was talking about with like Square Enix and other companies, now is where a lot of technology companies that came up in like the 90s and 2000s, they hit their peak and they're in that like post-bloat era of like long gradual decline, combined with the fact that we have social media and the internet now. It's a perfect stew to just sit in one spot and milk something that already exists, as opposed to like throwing all that out and being like, okay, we have to start completely over and make up like a new brilliant fantasy world for like children to love or something, and we need to profit off of. Oh God, this is so unbelievably hard. I guess let's try now. There's just so much reason to not want to do that. It's that there's no hard cutoff point because everyone's always online. You're always connected to other people. Star Wars is just as relevant in 2000 as 2010 as 2020 as it will be in 2030. Star Wars just is. It is
right.
there all day.
I think I get what you're kind of saying, and I do agree with Mark that we are definitely like the most infantilized generation by a huge margin. And it's just a definite thing about the internet is like if you have like a little niche interest or something, you can. You know, it used to be like, oh, you'd have to find a newsletter of people near you to talk about it. Now it's like, it doesn't matter. You will find your sub-communities. You will find your little group of people that will enable you to never have to change or push outside your little comfort zone or whatever.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And also, like I said, these franchises are like these lifelong franchises. Zelda, I played Ocarina. I have deep nostalgia glasses for Ocarina of Time. I mean, it's absurd. I used to run around outside and pretend I was Link. Like, I have deep nostalgic connections, but it is a little bit different. It's like when you fire up Ocarina of Time and you hear the music and you see him in the field on, the emotions I'm feeling then are like it's all up in the emotion. It's all emotion and childhood, and I'm out there playing with my sword in the field. But it's not quite the same thing as when you boot up like Elden Ring or something, and you're like you're feeling it in a different way. And I feel like it's just something different about millennials. I think it will probably continue on with future generations. Is that these franchises just don't stop? They just keep going, so that you can literally re-access the franchise from when you were 8. When you're 32, you can re-access that same franchise, and it's presenting itself as like, this is the same stuff you played when you were 8 years old. This is it. It is here. Tears of the Kingdom. Here it is. It is like this constant force in your life that's always there. It's like your friend. You're always there. You can always count on it. I think that is just a very different relationship with media that millennials have that I think is just pretty distinctive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, media is definitely ingrained in our lives and our personalities so much more than any previous generation. Like, yes, there were Star Wars fans in the fucking 70s, and they're huge dorks and nerds about it, but like, you couldn't just spend all day on Star Wars subreddit being a total freak about
right.
it. You know what I mean?
The thing about it, you brought something up that's really important, which is that's like when you're playing Ocarina of Time, and I have this for several games I've played like when I was very young too. Like if I boot up some of these games, there's like this great, when you're playing like something that's very nostalgic for you, or you're doing anything that's nostalgic for you, there's this great like sense of like comfort, because you don't, it's this very familiar thing. And I think that can actually be very good sometimes. Like in this very small dose, that could be a very like important thing. Maybe you need to remember something that maybe you've lost. But when you revel, it can be very like tempting to just keep reveling in that and never like move forward.
People want that to be all their media. People want all their media to only be giving them comfort all the time.
Yes, that's not healthy. Yeah, you have to. The best thing you could do is go back and maybe rediscover. Like rediscovery is the great thing, not nostalgia, but like looking at something that meant a lot to you and discovering what was important and what you can take from that into your current life and what's relevant to that in your current life, instead of just sitting there with that, because that's just gonna. I mean, it's miserable. And then, you do have to just sit around and wait for these companies to keep pandering to that feeling so you can just feel it over and over again and never exist currently.
And this is the thing. It's that people aren't doing this intentionally. I feel that the incentive structure has sort of changed under people's feet. And they're like, these companies got big. They need to make safe bets. They don't want to take risks on their development, which does make sense. At the same time, there's a perceived cultural demand for very high-end like graphics and advanced systems. They feel that that's what people want. And so they feel a necessity to generate that and produce on that. And this is why... I mean, I've talked about this in a couple of places before in like Patreon podcasts and stuff, but I have an idea, and I think that the game development companies would be happy about this. One, literally ban remakes. Make it so that you cannot make them, and also make it so that a specific series, you have to end it. You cannot add to the story anymore 5 years after it begins. So, like, you can make your first game, no more sequels, no more prequels, you got a 5-year window, then you're done. And okay, so banning is one thing, but on a more practical level, I mean, I've talked about this, in a couple places, but I have this idea to speak to this exact thing because I don't think they're doing it because they want to. I think they feel they need to. Let's save them from that. One, you could ban it. On the other hand, though, I have an idea for like a rating system called something like the BGE Cultural Preservation Scale or something like that.
I like this. I like where you're going.
Well, I'm glad. It's a separate metric. And I talked about this in like my Patreon podcast. You can listen to that if you want to hear more, but I'll summarize it now. It's like a separate rating scale that you would specifically review a game on, like the criteria of, does this thing like damage its cultural existence? So you make a really shitty remake of some game and it's just everybody hates it. It's totally shit. It gets a 1. Because not only is it just a bad game, it also pollutes the discourse. You make a game called
Resident Evil 4 Remake.
Oh, okay, sure. You want to talk about that one? Sure. Now when you Google Resident Evil 4, okay, Resident Evil 4 was a game that people connected with. It's not like it's the most brilliant piece of literature ever perceived or anything, but it exists in its own space. And now that there's a remake, that clutters the online environment. When you Google it, that comes up too. When you search for Leon Kennedy, I mean, sure, he was in the other games too, but like, you're going to get this new guy who, I mean, he doesn't even look like the original Leon. He's got a very different vibe to him. He's a different kind of guy. You might like that better. Nonetheless, there's an issue of cultural
and the
clutter
mechanics
that has happened. And the mechanics, the whole artistry of the game.
It erases the mechanics
obviously.
that were so brilliant from existence.
What I would like to do is make it so that there is some force, so that people value that like a new remake or a game comes, like a sequel comes out 10 years after the original, 20 years after the original, and it introduces a bunch of retcons that just like fuck up the original game in retrospect. And now, if you go back and play the original one, I mean, this happens to me all the time, these retcons fuck with your understanding of the game and are really they're just bad for the experience. They damage the cultural place. I love this. The
I'm not even the biggest fan of this series, but Halo, it's hard to even overstate to people who weren't there for it in the 2000s. Halo was a cultural fucking juggernaut. It was a system. It was the Xbox like flagship series. It had such like this presence about it, but like if they just ended it when Bungie stopped making the games, people would like look back on those and be like, oh, that was a legendary series. But now people are just like, oh yeah, fucking Halo, because of 4 or 5 and Infinite, these games that just keep coming out, they keep getting shit reviews, they keep like diluting the cultural like message of it, and like, you know, it just like the fan base is just, I don't know. I definitely know what you mean, where it's like, it's not even that they're all necessarily objectively bad games in and of themselves, even though I kind of think they kind of are in some ways. But like, it's about what they've done to the cultural legacy of something, which I don't even particularly have such a super strong attachment to. But it's just like, damn, it is crazy how just you just keep running something into the ground, people will stop fucking caring about it.
That's true, and that's the thing. It's a. I feel like they're consuming the body of like of a seed. A seed is growing and it can blossom and it has a cultural influence, and people want to like consume it, or it's like eating something that's already dead. They're kicking a dead horse, let it sit there, but instead they're dragging the entrails out of the horse and they're just throwing it everywhere. And it's a little gauche. At the very least, it's just quite a bit gauche, and I'm not a fan of it. So let me just reiterate. The point of this scale would be to apply a pressure so that companies, for example, feel a need to not just like fuck up their old works or constantly remake things. Because the thing is, I'm talking about all these forces that exist that incentivize that. They need a counter incentive in some way. So if I could snap my fingers and I suddenly had an organization that from every game that comes out gets a 1 to 10 on a cultural preservation scale. If it's a new original game, it's not even rated because it's new and there's nothing to apply to it. So that wouldn't be rated. But any sequel, any remake, any prequel, anything like that would get a score, and it could get a 10 if it just like adds to it and it's great and it's timely.
Like a new IP could get a 10 just for the value of being something new.
If you want to, I mean, sure, but it really doesn't even apply. It doesn't apply to like a new thing, really. So, but yeah, it gets a pass. It's not something to be critical of. It's a new thing. They're doing what we want, even if it's bad. And the point is to just generate new ideas, new energy, not just stagnation, because a lot of us, I think, detect stagnation in the current media landscape, and it would be good to push back.
I do have to say the obvious thing, which is, well, one, I love this idea of the scale. I would love that if people could agree on this, but a scale existing provides no incentive in any way, shape, or form to any company. The only thing that matters to them is money.
It's that people would care about it.
If people could care about it,
that.
if we could get people to understand that, like,
if people make,
it is hard to say don't buy a remake of your favorite thing, but it's like, God, please don't.
One thing in Nate's defense, though, is that for whatever reason, companies care about numbers. Like, you throw a number at them, and all of a sudden they're like, wait, what? So, like, for me, I'm just going to
I'm
do
sorry,
this.
it's just
I'm going to
true.
start doing this in all my reviews now. I will start applying the Best Guy Ever remake scale, and I will start throwing these numbers at companies. And
Why not?
hopefully,
Why
if
not?
it could catch on with enough YouTubers, and we all just start throwing these numbers at the companies, it's going to annoy them, because you can give them feedback and critique, but if you throw a number at them, they're like, what? Number? No.
The only
I want
problem with
good
this
number.
is that if you say it's a 10 and I say it's a 1, who's right? You know, and so
I will always refer back to the originator.
well,
BGE.
but that's the thing.
Like, of
It's
course.
not even just me. Like, Nate Bestman decides how good everything is. I don't even want that to be the case. I mean, I have an opinion about these things. I'm not educated on, like, specifically. I was never a Halo guy. I do not know how damaging, like, the new Halo things are to the Halo legacy or whatever. I'm sure it's something, but I just don't know. So I would want to, like, defer to those people. It's just, look, all I'm talking about is it would be good if people in the know had some commentary on this stuff to create an incentive. Yes, step 1, you make a review system or something. Step 2, you get people to care about it. Realistically, the way you would do that is over like a decade, you do this work and people start talking about it and they like it and they enjoy your reviews, just like any other like game review publication would develop like a reputation for itself. And is that realistic? Absolutely not, no. But it would be nice.
I
So.
mean,
Well, you could,
honestly, like, if anyone in the audience is thinking like this is silly or whatever, like think about how fucked we are. Like, I don't even think the IGN
just
like
gonna do
review of the Resident Evil 4 remake like acknowledges how intellectually bankrupt the actual like artistic product is. It's literally just like what like new ideas does it bring to the table apart from like slightly remixing a few things.
Well, they've got a whole different
They
scale.
have a dog that they pretend is dead, but then the dog's not dead later. So that's innovative. You know, that I thought that was really ground shifting.
Was the
stuff
dog
there.
not actually dead? I thought that was the thing in the updated one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they fake you out, and
Oh.
that was
Oh, okay.
brilliant design. So they pretend the dog's dead, and you're like, oh,
Well,
killed
why
the
would they
dog.
change- I mean-
and then you find out the dog's not dead.
I
Oh
don't
my
want to
God.
actually get into a discussion, but like, I mean, because that's an example of like, well, okay, but that's just different from how the original was. It's a remake. Why are you changing that? The dog was alive clearly in the original, and you save it, and that's like, that was a thing people enjoyed doing. And they would then you begin like, oh well, does a remake need to be exactly like the original? And it gets into a whole thing I don't want to get into right now, but yeah.
You could make like a non-profit for this, like the Doomsday Clock. You know, kind of like that.
Well, I mean,
Also
that
lead
would
to
be the
complete
idea. That
cultural
would be the idea.
destruction.
Yeah, and you know, of course, you would have to like develop trust. Look, I'm not that serious about it, people. It just would be nice if it existed. My best plan is just to ban remakes. Okay, that's my favorite plan. Or making it legally, you're not allowed to make an expansion to a universe after 5 years. 5 years is plenty. Make all you want in that window, and you're done. Okay,
think
I know
you're
that
gonna have
those
to
are
go with
future
the,
remakes.
that
you're
like
gonna-
all these people
but-
start using the BGE scale, and like half of them don't know where it comes from, and they're just like giving BGE scores. And like, what does BGE even stand for? Oh, I don't know.
no one
but
knows.
That's what
no
we
one
use
knows.
now.
It's the cultural preservation scale. That, I mean, this is the name I'm tinkering with.
What seems like what you got to do is you got to like actually you got to go like run and become a person in Congress so you can write
think
up this
so.
bill, you know. So then you can say like we're gonna make the anti-remake. You got to give it like a nice title.
The anti-remake
Lobbying
party
groups
will
are
be
gonna
my
brutal.
will be
Yeah.
You're gonna have, like, dead-
And then you're gonna
fish
get
on
like
your-
assassinated
in your
if you
front
try
door,
and
yeah.
shut down Genshin Impact.
Yeah, the
just
Square
'cause it's been
Enix,
5
the Square
years.
Enix assassins will come get you. You know,
And
on
you
your
know
own
what- you know what's
bed.
funny
Literal
about this?
Yakuza will fly over from Japan.
Similarly, it was a joke with a bit of a seriousness underlying it. But actually, after I'd been cooking this up for like a while, I made my video about it afterward. But Mike Stoklasa or whatever from Red Letter Media, he proposed a similar one for getting the government involved. Obviously, also a joke of I'm joking less than he is, but about for based on a true story, there should be a rating scale of is it really based on a? Are we got a 10 or a
Fargo.
1?
It literally means nothing.
Which frankly, I think that there makes some sense there. You know, it'd be nice
Based on a true story, the state of Wisconsin exists. There you go.
not that I've seen. Okay. Now, did I think I had one other thing? Oh, okay. So we're kind of reaching the end of the talk here. I think I had mainly one more thing I wanted to bring up, which is it is a solution. So I've been trying to bring some solution to the table to fulfill my obligation from years back, and this is another one. So this one already exists. It's just it should be encouraged and promoted more, which is the solution to the issue of what I talked about before about there being different ways of consuming the same media. about, like, you know, some people just play to relax at the end of the day. They don't really care that much. And other people are more like hardcore gamers. They really dig into they like the challenge. They like to master the systems. I think the real solution for this disparity is basically what we've kind of already got on YouTube, but maybe, I don't know, really it's about changing consciousness of the people to keep this in mind more actively. Different reviewers existing for different groups, and that being like something people keep in mind. So for example, I always bring up that I was very impressed when Super Bunny Hop 100% completed Metal Gear Solid 5. That was to me like, wow, I would never do that because most of this is not worth playing. You did? Oh, okay, well, great. Well, great.
I did.
I would never capture all those
never
animals.
Do it again.
I would not spend my time trapping those animals and doing all that. But maybe it takes less time than I thought. But when he did that, I was like,
it was an undertaking.
This is like, he's like the completionist. This is the kind of guy that is going to go through all this stuff. Therefore, he's going to speak to maybe like me as a completionist if I'm a completionist, or like if you're like a challenge guy. I mean, for example, you, Mark, and the Electric Underground are for shmup enthusiasts. That's the kind of thing. So in this way, this is actually sort of a good thing about modernity and like specific YouTubers with specific passions, and people will go pursue those. My only kind of issue that exists right now is that people are still sort of funneled to like the big overarching, like you could call it uncharitable, like the marketing wing department people that are just, they're the top of the industry. They just have a lot of positive things to say about stuff, and they're attached to companies, so they get promoted more. So, you know,
they get stuff early.
They get stuff early, which allows them to make videos sooner. Yep.
It is interesting. People will be like, oh, IGN gave this a bad review. It's like IGN didn't give it a number. One specific guy who wrote the review gave it a number. And you will get more out of reviews if you
but
follow
as
one
we've seen with
guy.
Mello here, you are right, Cyber. You should give it a little more credit than that. But or rather, Mark here was in Nintendo Life on the inside. They edit your shit, so you can't.
IGN, the editor has power over. They won't hire. That would be insane and awesome if they hired some guy and he came in and he's like churning out these rogue reviews, and IGN's like, this dude's he's a loose cannon, we can't stop him. No,
too much
they will stop him immediately.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, even though they're short and mainly for comedy, I get more out of like a Yahtzee review, even when I don't agree with him, just because like I understand what he's looking for in a game and like what will appeal to him so much more than just some nebulous review or review site.
You're right. Another example, like everyone knows that Donkey hates JRPGs. You do not go to Donkey when you want a JRPG. Exactly. And I mean that I want to promote that kind of consciousness. And I would also like for people, part of this is that people understand transparency. And I want people to understand what kind of gamer they are. Like, I know that, like, a Nintendo Life review is probably not going to be what I personally want to know. Frankly, the kind of reviews that I like most are, like, the game's come out, it's been out for weeks or months, and, like, one of these big, like, Matthew Matosis-style autist reviewers makes a video, and I'm like, that's my guy, that's who I want to hear the opinion of. Even though, I mean, you know, I'm not exactly the same kind of gamer that Matthew Matosis is, or not that he's making reviews right now, but that's the thought process that I think helps on this. So, unfortunately, like with Mickle, I can't snap my fingers. I have no immediate solution to, like, make people keep that in mind more often, nor can I shift any industry trends. But I can, as a YouTuber, try to, I guess, educate people a little bit, or just change the way they think about stuff, and hopefully that is something that people do more of. But another argument, Nate, it's entirely pointless. The kind of people listening to you already do that, and you're not reaching the people that don't listen to you. Therefore, this is all a big jerk-off and waste of time. So congratulations on your lovely time being spent on this, Nate. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
A fun counterpart to that, though. I mean, I've been lost in obscurity on YouTube for many years, and then as of late, I'm getting more recognition because of the Crobat. You know, that's
how I found you. Crowcat, yep.
Exactly. And I feel like if you keep transparency and you just hang in there, just like by the skin of your teeth, hang in there, you'll be ready, and you might get the word out there, even accidentally. Like, people might accidentally come across you. They don't even want to come across you, and they will. Like,
yeah, you're right. And
this
is how the BGE Cultural Preservation Scale will emerge on the world stage in about 10 years from now. when all of a sudden the companies will suddenly realize, wait, people are saying that we got a remake of the Final Fantasy VII remake got a 1 on the cultural preservation scale. Our stocks are tanking. What do we do? And then they will feel my wrath, and they will know that there's no more of this tomfoolery allowed in my dojo.
Yeah, sometimes I think part of it is the smaller guys, the people who aren't, following in. Sometimes you just have to hang in there. I mean, it's kind of that simple at times. It's just because there's a lot of amazing YouTubers who I've really respected, and they just evaporate, because they're not going along with everyone else, and they just the weight of all of it just crushes them. So just hanging in there, I think, is part of it.
Yeah, I speaking to that demographic of which some of us are part of as well. It's you should really try to make your YouTubing process, your creative endeavor, which relates to the media that we're talking about as well. It should be justified on its own sake, I think, to some degree. Like, if you're trying to make art, you want it to be something that you're proud of, and you're putting your all in. And I know that there are practical concerns. You got to ship units. You got to cater to modern audiences, to some degree. I understand that. And your company might be aiming for the wide audience when you would rather aim for the smaller target demographic of like hardcore players or something. I don't know. I guess all I can say is just keep hanging there.
I talked to a developer I really respect about this. He's an indie developer, and he had a great insight on this that I thought was really, really good. And it comes back to the original Resident Evil 4, which is Resident Evil 4, when you look at the marketing, when you look at the fan base, most people consider it survival horror. And that's part of the reason why it's so popular and has such great sales. But hidden inside that survival horror shell is an amazing like combat beat 'em up action game. But it's like it's hidden in there like a M&M, And I feel like that is one thing, like if you're an artist and you want to try and bring these more esoteric ideas and designs and concepts, and you don't want to just follow everyone else, you can start to like sandwich them into more attractive packaging, but inside it, you open the package and bam, it's awesome inside. But you might have to,
that takes research.
Think about the
packaging.
The packaging.
Yeah. Well, we've gone over quite a few topics here. It's been a meaty and good discussion. I think it is now time to turn back to our thesis statement and review. Is old good, new bad? And we can all speak to that if you care to. I'll summarize my thoughts on that. My conclusion, it is not, in fact, I know, hate to disappoint everybody, it's not that old, good, new, bad, simple as. There's more nuance to it, and as Sakurai kind of alluded to in his video, like, there are, in fact, things that can be learned from old game design. I mean, if you had a longer discussion than like a 3-minute video from the guy, I'm sure he would agree with that. But there are lessons that can be learned about old games that just fell out of fashion in modern games, and I think it's due to this sort of hype cycle, this sort of tech accelerationism that exists specifically in game design in particular, but you can apply similar things to any other mediums as well. That people just want to be on the cutting edge. And again, this is what I was kind of trying to talk about in Mickle. There are incentives that companies feel a need to appeal to. They feel that there's an incentive structure to make the graphics as good as they can possibly be. Even if, let's just say, for example, that company had like a brilliant sprite development team on staff, but it's actually a lot cheaper to make 3D art, so we're just going to shift to the new thing. And that's not like a thing that's immoral or that they shouldn't do. Sometimes the business concerns just have to be dealt with, but it's also normal to like notice that something like meaningful perhaps is being lost there, and maybe they could do something like give that sprite work team like in charge of like a AA game with a lower budget to keep making those, because there is a dedicated audience there that still would want to be catered to and is willing to part with their money to keep playing the games. So in summary, old good, new bad is not totally true, but there are a lot of good things that it would be good to keep in mind going forward, and there's lessons to be learned, and hopefully I've helped bring up some of those here. You guys want to comment as well? Any thoughts on this?
I mean, the main thing I just want to say is, there's good things in all eras, and it's always good to go back and look at a lot of those games with like an open mind and be able to play them, and you'll pick out a lot of great things from them. There's great stuff in the new, great games coming out nowadays. I mean, you brought out Neo Chueli, that was a good one. I mean, a friend of mine recommended
and that game was
Hi-Fi
innovative
Rush,
too.
Which I played, and that was a great modern, that's a great modern game that came out recently. So there's always going to be good stuff. Even like if an industry's in its worst times, it's like everything's broken down. People will still make great things. They just can't help it, So
and there's one other little thing I didn't bring up here, which was a lot of the great Hollywood artwork was produced in an era where the Hays Code was in place. And it like by restricting and forcing people to sort of think creatively because there were restrictions on the way they could express themselves, paradoxically, as Orson Welles talks about, like the limitations actually stimulate more creative artwork. So like when technology was a little bit worse and people had to be more creative, there was probably a thing there too where people had to kind of turn on their brain and think creatively.
Yeah. They came up with great solutions that you can still use. Maybe that limitation's not there anymore, but those solutions are still valuable. So don't disregard it all. Whether it's from an old time or a new time or any of that.
Mm-hmm. Cybermark?
I was just gonna say it's easy to be doomer about like if you just look at the big studios and all their massive like all the worst flops and shittiest games they've ever made, but there's still a thriving indie scene out there. Sometimes it's harder to find a good indie game like Pizza Tower, but they're out there, they exist.
Pizza Tower, right, or Hollow Knight, or some other ones.
Shoutouts to Post Elvis. All right, never mind.
Don't know that one. Mark, you want to comment?
Yes, I just didn't want to step on anyone. So I would say that old is good, but often for reasons we don't ever look into or care to look into, because I think most people just assume old's good because of nostalgia. And the funny thing is, I think nostalgia kind of puts up a wall of actually investigating what old games were doing so well. Like their level design, the density of the gameplay, the difficulty curves.
Can I just be
very much so?
Saying old good could lead to conclusions like, let's just remake a thing with better graphics. What could go wrong with that? Yeah, a shallow thought.
Or you take like the most shallow things, like this game had a branching path, so that's it. We just put branching paths and everything. Mission accomplished. I think analyzing old stuff for what it is doing and what is doing right can actually really help inform new stuff. And with new, I would say new isn't bad. I just think new is not taking advantage of everything it has at its fingertips. I think new is complacent. I guess that's how I'd say. Like new is very complacent and a little bit cocky about, well, we have graphics and we have, big loading screen or big maps and we've got lots of content, therefore we're better. But I think they're missing out on a lot of the fundamentals. So I think there's a lot of potential, especially with technology right now. There's so much stuff that can be done that's not even being utilized. Like, for example, we talk about modern tech being able to do things old tech can't do. One of them is like enemy limits, where in the past you could get like 4 enemies on screen. The Xbox 360, Ninja Gaiden 2, they put a ton of enemies on the screen, and the poor 360 is just like chugging, trying to render all that stuff. And now on the Xbox One X, you can play that game now, and the frame rate is actually solid because it can handle all those enemies on screen. But ironically, games these days don't really take advantage of that as much because they don't want the game to be as intense. So I think like we have the world at our fingertips in terms of like what new stuff can do is insane. I just think that we're not really taking advantage of it.
I'll add one more point speaking to what you're saying there. This was from another one of my old podcasts, I think. There's a clip of Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World where he is, it's a classic. He was criticizing his class for they were partaking in a game show or like one of those like quiz shows, a trivia show or whatever. And their knowledge was, the reason they were doing well was because it was all pop culture knowledge. And it wasn't anything like meaningful or artistic. It was based on just the popcorn filler information of the day. And Mr. Feeney was very critical. He said, like, you guys are wasting your time. When I was a child, I had one new book per week or whatever. Like when Isaac Newton was a child, they had like a new book per year, and they ravenously consumed it. They loved it. You guys get a new website every second, and you squander it. And he's like, shame on you. I'm leaving. I'm walking out on you. That is an incomplete analysis of the issue, I think. The other one being that he is, as an old boomer himself, Mr. Feeney is not incorporating the inherently sort of black-pilling reality of living in a world of information overload, where there's so much information available to you that you have a totally new challenge of parsing which of that information is worth your time consuming and which of it is not worth consuming.
Filtering, yeah.
That is the new challenge of our like internet age that we live in now. And so these are the forces that you need to overcome. Not, you got one book a year, so of course you're going to enjoy it. It's that you have too much, and you have to develop like discipline, and you have to come up with sort of a new system of determining what should and shouldn't be made. And I think to a degree, That's what sort of modern media is going through.
Well, you know what's ironic about that is because of the age we're in now, the role of the critic is actually way more valuable than ever before.
Yeah, because of these forces.
Because of these forces, right? Where in the past, okay, you get one book a year. It doesn't matter if the critic says it sucks or not. That's all you got. So it's like whatever. You've got one book. It's it. But in today's, when you got so much at your fingertips, you got so much taking at your attention, so much you can wade through. Like a critic being able to help you sift through and see what is quality isn't is like actually a super important role that people can play. So I think people should take it more seriously.
And that's going to do it, everybody, for this episode of The Gamerzone. Thank you to my lovely guests for stopping by. It's been a real pleasure, you guys. All their links to the stuff they do and their channels will be in the description, so if you like what you heard, go check out their stuff. These are all fine creators. Except Cybershell, who sucks. Hate that guy.
Yeah, I suck. Don't worry about me.
Thanks for having me on.
No,
it's fun,
it's
like
been
always,
a pleasure.
man.
Yeah, it's been real fun.
Yeah, really fun.
Let's do it again sometime. All right, thanks guys for stopping by. Everyone, thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time with something else. Goodbye.
Farewell.
See ya.
Adios.